Chapter 744. In the end, Wang Yu still came down. The branch he belonged to was only one of the branches of the Wang family and was not valued by the Wang family. Even his father did not dare to put on airs in front of the eldest young master of the Wang family. "I'm really sorry, Brother Li. The Wang family did not teach you well and caused you trouble." Wang Yong looked at Li Yi apologetically. When he turned around, his face instantly darkened and he said coldly, "Quickly apologize to County Marquis Li." He was angry not only because Wang Yu had offended someone he shouldn't have, but also because Wang Yu had made friends with someone he shouldn't have. This was something the Wang family could not allow. The young man named Wang Yu no longer looked arrogant. He lowered his head and said in a low voice, "County Marquis Li, I'm sorry. I was wrong." Hearing his soft voice, Wang Yong's face darkened and he said, louder, "Didn't you eat?" Wang Yu raised his head and looked at Li Yi. He said loudly, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." "Oh." Li Yi looked at him with a faint smile and asked, "Why don't you tell me where you were wrong?" Wang Yu was stunned and then he had an urge to cry. Yes, where did he go wrong? He just came to have a meal with his friend and did not offend anyone. Why was he blocked here? What did he do wrong? The young man still could not stand the grievance. As he thought about it, his eyes became a little moist. Wang Yong said apologetically, "I'm really sorry about what happened today. Brotherly, I will pay you a visit and apologize in 2 days." Wang Yong left with Wang Yu. Paying a visit and apologizing was only one reason. The cooperation between the Wang family and the Li family was more important. After not seeing each other for 5 months, he still had a lot of things to discuss with Li Yi. The people who stayed in the restaurant were a little disappointed. The future head of the Wang family had come personally, but nothing exciting had happened. It was really boring. However, Wang Yong's attitude towards that person had truly shocked them. The situation in the capital was very complicated. If the future head of the Wang family treated him so cautiously, they didn't know if he could still control the big shots that came one after another. Eat more vegetables. You should eat more too, maybe because the atmosphere was ruined. Ruoqing and Xingzumo were very polite today. Li Yi had to keep putting food on their plates to ease the atmosphere. It was unlikely that Miss Xing would pick up food for him. Wan Ruoqing smiled as she picked up the food from a distance and placed it on his plate. After scanning the three for a long time, the sloppy old man took a big bite out of his drumstick and looked away, unable to bear to look at them any longer. In a carriage on the street, Yi of Yu and Xingzumo, he couldn't bear. In the end, he could not help but raise his head and ask in a low voice, "Big brother, who is that person?" "Shut!" Wang Yong glanced at him and said, "I won't tell your father about what happened today, but if you still interact with those people in the future, don't blame the Wang family for being heartless." Yong to Wang's words. What happened today left a deep impression on him. He had never seen his usually gentle brother show such an expression. How could he not take his brother's words to heart? At the same time, that smiling face left an indelible impression in his heart. Outside the carriage, a sedan chair hurriedly passed by, heading for a restaurant. Assistant Minister Wei of the Ministry of Rights rushed into the restaurant and immediately saw the 2 guards of the Wei family holding their arms. His eyelids twitching, he walked over and asked, "Where's the young master?" Wei Junliang waved from above. Father, I'm here." When Wei Junliang ran down, the officials didn't stop him. Assistant Minister Wei looked at him and asked with a frown, "What's going on?" Wei Junliang stammered and didn't say a word. Even young Duke Qin didn't dare to resist when he was slapped. Even Wang Yong had to treat him with respect. As his father, no matter how he thought about it, he wasn't good enough. Assistant Minister Wei. County Magistrate Liu walked up and cupped his hands at the man. "Lord Liu." Assistant Minister Wei recognized him. He looked at him and asked, "What exactly is going on?" Li Yi tilted his head and glanced at him, saying, "You'll have to ask Assistant Minister Wei's son." "Who are you?" Assistant Minister Wei only heard that his son was detained by the officials and hurried over. He didn't know the specifics, so he looked at the young man who interrupted and asked with a frown. County Magistrate Liu stepped forward and said, "This is Marquis Li, Marquis Li." Hearing this title, Assistant Minister Wei's heart skipped a beat, but he still asked, "Which Marquis Li?" "Marquis Chang and," County Magistrate Liu answered. This time, Assistant Minister Wei's heart completely sank. Marquis Chang and Li Yi. This name was really well known. The King of Shu and even Prime Minister Qin's faction had suffered great losses at his hands. It was impossible to estimate how much damage they had suffered. In the current imperial court, the two factions were opposing each other, and this Marquis Li was a key figure in the opposing faction. Even the Chen family behind him had to avoid him, let alone a mere assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. Moreover, as the new assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, he knew better than anyone how he got his position, especially after listening to County Magistrate Liu's story. Cold sweat began to drip uncontrollably from Assistant Minister Wei's forehead. It was already hard enough for him to have a conflict with this person, but what was even more frightening was that his side wasn't in the right. Assistant Minister Wei lowered his head and said solemnly, "It's all my fault for not teaching properly and offending Marquis Li. This official will take him back and discipline him properly." Li Yi waved his hand and said nonchalantly, "It's fine. It's normal for young people to be impulsive. Assistant Minister Wei, there's no need to punish your son too much. It's better to guide him." Assistant Minister Wei froze for a moment and immediately nodded. Yes. I understand. Many thanks, Marquis Li." At this moment, he was extremely astonished. This Marquis Li was so reasonable and didn't seem as difficult to deal with as the rumors said. It seemed like he was very easy to talk to. "Let's not talk about the conflict for now." Li Yi looked at him and said, "However, your son dirted my friend's clothes just now. I don't know. He should compensate." Assistant Minister Wei fiercely nodded and said, "This is how it should be. I will make him compensate for this young lady's clothes." If everyone was as reasonable as Assistant Minister Wei, it would save a lot of trouble. Li Yi smiled and said, "Since it's like this, I won't say anything else. Assistant Minister Wei, don't forget to deliver 10,000 taels of silver to Willow Alley before tomorrow." "Of course." Assistant Minister Wei nodded and then froze for a moment. He asked with some uncertainty, "How much?" Even if the clothes were completely made of gold thread, they wouldn't be worth 10,000 taels of silver, right? I must have misheard. A trifling 10,000 taels, Sir Wei definitely won't take it to heart. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Then it's settled. Sir Wei can take your son away." He naturally wouldn't take 10,000 taels of silver to heart. It wasn't that the Wei clan couldn't take it out, but if he really did, he would probably have to pay for his coffin. At this moment, Assistant Minister Wei finally understood that this wasn't a matter of compensation. This was a warning and also a deterrent. If the Wei clan paid 10,000 taels of silver, then this matter would be settled. Otherwise, his position as the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights would probably have to change. Assistant Minister Wei didn't doubt that the seemingly harmless young man just now had this kind of ability. He didn't know how he left the restaurant and walked on the street in a daze. At a certain moment, he was startled awake and hurriedly said, quick, to the Qin estate. "Father." Wei Junliang had just said one word when he was slapped across the face by Assistant Minister Wei, attracting the attention of all the pedestrians on the street. "Father, you hit me." Young Master Wei, who had never been treated like this before, covered his face and said in disbelief, "Isn't it just a county marquis? You are the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights and have Uncle Qin behind you. Why are you afraid of him? How did I give birth to such an idiot like you?" Assistant Minister Wei fiercely glared at him and said through gritted teeth, do you know why the previous assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights was imprisoned? Chapter 745. After Wang Yong, assistant minister Wei of the Ministry of Rights also left with his son. They didn't lower their voices on purpose, so the people in the restaurant could hear them clearly. 10,000 taels of silver. Just because the girls' clothes were stained with a few drops of wine, the Wei family had to pay 10,000 taels of silver as compensation. This price was unimaginably high. Of course, those who could sit here and eat were not ordinary people at the bottom of society. Compared with ordinary people, they naturally had a better sense of politics. The officialdom had always been like a battlefield. The situation in the court changed every day, not to mention in 5 months. Everyone knew that County Marquis Li and the Qin family had never been on good terms with King of Shu's faction. In fact, before he left the capital, King of Shu's faction had secretly made a lot of moves. Many people with a keen sense of smell had sensed it. However, County Marquis Li left the capital at that time. Coincidentally, the son of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works besieged and killed 2 girls on the street. Then, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works was investigated. Overnight, he turned from a high-ranking official to a prisoner. His Majesty was furious about this. During that time, King of Shu's faction didn't dare to do anything out of line for fear of provoking the emperor again. However, as time went by, they began to move again. His Majesty happened to be ill, so the morning court session was not held. Except for important matters, everything else was handed over to the Minister of Rights to make decisions. As a result, they became more and more unscrupulous. However, County Marquis Li came back. Today's matter naturally couldn't be easily understood. This was a response and a demonstration. It could also be said that it was a declaration to those who were hiding behind the scenes. Thinking of all the things that happened 5 months ago, some people were secretly shocked. It seemed that there would be a big storm in the capital again. After the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, several powerful officials came one after another. Of course, they were the parents of the playboys upstairs. This meal wasn't peaceful at all. Li Yi was a little regretful. The good atmosphere had been ruined by these ignorant fellows. He knew some of these people, but he had never heard of some of their names. It seemed that a lot of things had happened in the capital in the past few months. He didn't have the mood to greet the others. After all, except for Wei Junliang, most of them were sitting quietly. He didn't want to extort them again. Without a good reason, he couldn't ask them for compensation. He couldn't just say that he didn't like them, right? This was too much. After warming up a little, he felt much better. He didn't want to deal with those people anymore. Therefore, he left those nobles and officials to County Magistrate Liu. Seeing that the 2 women stopped moving their chopsticks, Li Yi also put down his chopsticks and asked, "Are you full? If you are, let's go." Wan Ruoqing and Xing Zumo looked at each other and nodded. Li Yi looked back at County Magistrate Liu. "Mr. Liu, please take care of this. It's no trouble at all." County Magistrate Liu waved his hand again and again. If he was alone today, he naturally couldn't control such a situation. However, with County Marquis Li standing behind him, he didn't need to worry too much about the families of those people. As the 2 of them spoke, a few more people walked in from outside. Every time someone came in, a small commotion would erupt. "Who is this? I don't know him. Is there such a person in the circle of officials and nobles in the capital? You don't even recognize him. Isn't he the 5th master of the Qin clan?" After being enlightened by one person, everyone suddenly understood. The Qin manor was prosperous. Prime Minister Qin had 5 sons, and 3 of them were officials in the court. When the Qin clan was at its peak, the 2 of them held important positions in the Shangshu province and directly participated in the affairs of the court. Although the Qin clan's current power couldn't be compared to that time, it still couldn't be underestimated. The fourth master of the Qin clan was low-key. Although he didn't participate in court politics, he had a lot of influence in the business world. Only the fifth master of the Qin clan didn't have any talent, but in terms of fame, in the Qin clan, he was probably second only to the biggest playboy in the capital, young Duke Qin. There was no other reason. 2 years ago, a scandal broke out in the Qin clan that shook the entire capital, and it happened to fifth master Qin. Young Duke Qin, who had always had a special fetish for married women, had unexpectedly set his sights on his own uncle one day. Taking advantage of his drunkenness, he forced himself on the concubine that fifth master Qin had taken in. After fifth master Qin bumped into him, he kicked him out of the room. The concubine couldn't bear the humiliation and committed suicide on the spot. At the time, this matter was very big and caused a huge uproar in the entire capital. Later, for some reason, it was left unsettled. After that, young Duke Qin was still young Duke Qin, but fifth master Qin was no longer that fifth master Qin. His identity had become his humiliation. Because of his identity as fifth master Qin, everyone fawned over him on the surface but secretly mocked and disdained him. In the future, no matter how quickly the Qin clan soared, fifth master Qin would never be able to raise his head again. County Magistrate Liu went over to greet him. Li Yi's gaze briefly met with a brawny man behind the middle-aged man before quickly moving away. Xing Zumo and Wan Ruoqing stood up, but the latter's body swayed. If it weren't for Li Yi's timely support, she probably would have fallen to the ground. "What's wrong?" Li Yi asked with concern. Wan Ruoqing frowned slightly and said, "I think I bumped into something just now." When she was avoiding that man just now, her calf bumped into a table and chair. At that time, she was nervous and didn't feel anything. Now that she was completely relaxed, there was a burst of pain. Xing Zumo walked over to help Li Yi support her. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Can you still walk?" "It's fine." Wan Ruoqing shook her head. With Xing Zumo's support, although it was a bit difficult to walk, she could still move slowly. Qin Yu and fifth master Qin didn't have much communication. When they walked down the stairs, they didn't look at Li Yi and walked straight out of the restaurant. When Li Yi and the two women walked out, they just happened to see Assistant Minister of Revenue Xing Shichen rushing over. He looked at Xing Zumo with an extremely surprised expression. Xing Zumo lowered her head and didn't say anything. On the street, seeing Wan Ruoqing frown with every step, Li Yi felt that the asking price for the clothes just now was still a bit too low. That Wei guy had gotten it too easy. However, after all, he was a man of his word. It was hard to take back what he had said. It was not appropriate to raise the price now. If he could not deliver the money by tomorrow, it would be reasonable for him to double the compensation. Presumably, the other party would have nothing to say about it. "Does it hurt a lot?" The street was bustling with people, and carriages couldn't go through. Seeing Wan Ruoqing's tightly furrowed brows, Li Yi finally stopped and asked. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said with a smile, "It's fine." Her brows didn't even relax, so this smile looked a bit forced. Li Yi walked in front of her and squatted down. "Come on up." "Ah." Wan Ruoqing stilled slightly. When she understood what he meant, her pretty face blushed. He was different from all the men she knew. Although she had tried her best to get used to the way the two of them interacted, she still felt that putting food on each other's plates was the limit of what she could do. This was something she had only gotten used to after a long time because when he said these things, his eyes were always as clear as water, without a trace of lust. Other than him, if it was anyone else, she would most likely think of them as a lecher and wouldn't give them any good looks. But habit was habit. If she was carried by him through the crowded streets and watched by so many people, just thinking about it made her face a little hot. Xing Zumo also looked at this scene in a daze. At this time, Li Yi had already begun to urge. "It will be dark by the time we walk back like this." Li Yi looked back and said. "Let's hurry, it's not the first time anyway." The first time he was talking about was naturally when she had fainted from a high fever when she came out of Ning Wang Fu in Qing and Fu. Xing Zumo turned her head with some difficulty. Not, first time. Chapter 746. Wei Junliang's mind was still muddled as he stepped through the gates of Duke Chen's estate. Just now, while they were walking, he had already heard his father describe the past of that Marquis Li. He had beaten Duke Qin, Royal Prince Duanyang, and the King of Shu in front of all the civil and military officials. Who knew how many playboys in the capital had suffered at his hands? Chen Lisan had locked himself in his home and refused to see anyone. Cui Shixin had become a frightened bird. Duke Qin had just been slapped, the King of Shu had been banished, and Royal Prince Duanyang had become a eunuch, and that Marquis Li was still safely staying in the capital. These were his past achievements. However, this was not all. His reputation was not built from fighting. He was also the head of the Mathematics Academy and the teacher of many princes and princesses. A few months ago, the vigorous investigation in the capital had been carried out by a student of the Mathematics Academy. The fall of the previous assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Chen Bo, was also during that investigation. It was because Chen Bo was imprisoned that his father had the opportunity to be pushed out of the spotlight by the Qin family. After some maneuvering in court, he was transferred from a place far away from the capital to here. From a certain perspective, he had gone from a playboy in a remote place to a playboy in the capital. Should he thank that person? But why did he still feel a little guilty? Wei Ji was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. With the powerful support of the Qin family, with his current age, it was not impossible to take a small step forward before he retired. However, at this moment, he no longer dared to think about these things. The most important thing now was to solve the problem in front of him. Just as he stepped through the gates of the Qin family, Wei Ji looked at the gatekeeper and said somewhat impatiently, "Is the manager here?" "I have an urgent matter." The current manager of the Qin family was Qin Qing, but the manager that Wei Ji spoke of was the second master of the Qin family, Qin Chong. He naturally had his reasons. Qin Chong was his brother-in-law, so it would be more suitable for the two of them to communicate. "Miao Yu, I heard that the brothel has a new show these days. I heard that it is not bad. Do you want me to go with you some other day?" In a small garden behind the Qin residence, there were many artificial mountains and flowing water. Chen Chong walked to the pavilion and smiled at a white-haired lady. The white-haired woman looked at the water with a hint of worry hidden between her brows. When she turned her head, her brows relaxed. She shook her head and said, "Second brother is busy with work. I'll let Xiao accompany me for these things." Chen Chong shook his head and smiled. "I don't have much to do recently. Whenever you want to go, second brother will take a leave to accompany you." The white-haired woman didn't say anything else. As a dignified official, she stood outside the courtyard and looked at him with a smile on her face. A servant of the Qin manor walked over and pointed at a place not far away. He said respectfully, "Second master, Lord Wei of the Board of Rights is here." He knew about the relationship between Sir Wei and the second master, so he didn't stop him and brought him here. A hint of confusion appeared on Qin Chong's face as he asked, "The Bureau of Rights has been rather busy these past few days. How did you find the time to come here today?" Wei Ji revealed a dejected expression and said, "It's all because of this brat." When Wei Junliang saw Qin Chong, he only called him uncle, in a low voice before lowering his head and remaining silent. Qin Chong glanced back at the pavilion and pointed ahead. "Let's talk over there." "Second brother, there's no need." A gentle voice came from behind him. The white-haired woman had already walked out. After nodding slightly at Wei Ji, she looked at Qin Chong and said, "You can talk here. I'll go take a walk in the back." Saying this, she walked deeper into the garden with the two servant girls. Qin Chong nodded and then walked into the pavilion. "Speak. What exactly is the matter?" The Wei family could be considered to have some power in the capital. they wouldn't go so far as to seek out the Chin family just because a junior had caused trouble. Wei Ji sighed and said, "Today, Liang Er was eating in a restaurant. Because of a woman, he got into a conflict with someone. You want the Wei family to pay 10,000 taels of silver for a mere piece of clothing?" After hearing this, Chen Chong didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled and asked, "I'd like to know, in the capital, who would be so bold?" "The Marquis of Chang'an County, Li Yi," Wei Ji said gravely as he looked at him. The smile on Chen Chong's face froze. His gaze was like lightning as he looked at Wei Ji and asked word by word, "Who, did you say?" "The Marquis of Chang'an County, Li Yi," Wei Ji repeated. Chen Chong's face darkened. He looked at Wei Junliang and asked, "Speak. What exactly happened? Don't leave out a single word." Hearing this icy voice, Wei Junliang shivered. When he spoke again, his voice was trembling and tears were about to fall. "I and young Duke Qin." After hearing Wei Junliang's words, Wei Ji saw that Chen Chong's face was dark and that he hadn't said anything. He couldn't help but feel uneasy and asked, "That 10,000 taels of silver, he actually came back?" Chen Chong clenched his fists and muttered, "What does this mean? A warning?" Chen Chong's expression became calm again. At a certain moment, he turned his head to look at Wei Ji and said, "That 10,000 taels of silver, just think of it as buying a lesson." Hearing this, Wei Junliang's expression immediately changed. Because Wei Ji was already mentally prepared, he only revealed a bitter expression and didn't speak. "When did he say?" "Before tomorrow." Chen Chong waved his hand and said, "Go back and prepare before the sky darkens." Behind the fake mountain, a delicate figure leaned against it, a hint of a smile on her lips. She closed her eyes, put her palms together, and sincerely said, "Thank the gods and Buddhas, it's good that you're back, it's good that you're back." When Wei Junliang walked out of the Qin estate, both sides of his face were swollen. In the end, he still ended up in the same state as Duke Qin, except that the former had been beaten by the Marquis of Li Yi, while he had been beaten by his own father. There were many wastrels with swollen faces like him in the capital today. The people of the capital were shocked to see a few important figures walk out of a restaurant with gloomy expressions. The young people following behind them were crestfallen, as if they had been hit by frost. After teaching their own juniors a lesson, the officials and nobles of the capital all had extremely complicated expressions on their faces. That person was using this method to tell them that he had returned. Although the atmosphere between men and women in the Jing kingdom was still somewhat traditional, there were many reasons for a man to carry a woman on his back and walk on the street. At most, people would look at him a few times, but it might not necessarily be considered indecent. However, when they returned to Willow Lane and put Ruoqing down, her face was still red to the ears. Li Yi didn't have anything to be shy about. After all, it wasn't the first time he had carried her on his back. Besides, she had carried Xiao Huan, Mississippi Lu, Yong Ning, and the Tsundra Lolita. In comparison, although Mississippi Lu usually didn't show off, she actually had the best figure. Li Yi discovered this when she taught him how to ride a horse last time. Next, it should be Wan Ruoqing. Xiao Huan was still young, so there was still room for development in the future. Li Yi stopped some thoughts in time, looked at Wan Ruoqing, and said, "See how your injuries are. Do you need to call the doctor over?" The blush on Wan Ruoqing's pretty face hadn't faded yet. She shook her head and said, "No need. After a while, you should be fine after applying some medicinal wine. Let's see." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Let's see how serious the injuries are first." Wan Ruoqing's face became even redder. Her injuries were on her calf. If he wanted to see, wouldn't he have to take off her shoes and socks and roll up her pants? But how could a woman's private area be so easily seen by others? Xing Zumo glanced at Li Yi and said, "You go out first." Li Yi looked at her and asked in confusion, "Why? A woman's private area, is that somewhere you can look?" Sing Zumo glared at him again and said, I'll just watch from here. Li Yi then realized that this wasn't the future, where the streets were full of white legs and some girls' pants couldn't even cover their buttocks. This was still an era where one had to be responsible for looking at a girl's feet. However, what Miss Sang said wasn't quite right. If she couldn't look at her feet, then other places. Some images emerged in Li Yi's mind, and he couldn't help but look at her a few more times. Seeing that he was looking at her strangely, Sing Zumo seemed to have thought of something. Her face turned redder than Ruoqing's, and there was a hint of annoyance in her voice. Get out now. After waiting outside for a while, Sing Zumo came out, her cheeks still red. She glanced at him and said, I looked. It's just some bruises. It shouldn't be a big deal. Li Yi nodded and said, I'll have someone bring some medicine for bruises later. There were many good things from the palace at home, which should be better than those sold in the medicine shop. Sing Zumo didn't speak and didn't look at him. The atmosphere began to become a bit awkward. Li Yi looked at the sky. It was time to go back to cook. He looked back at her and said, if there's nothing else, I'll go back first. Sing Zumo waved her hand. Go. Li Yi thought about it, turned around, opened his arms, and said with a smile, we haven't seen each other for a long time. Won't you give me a warm hug? Bah, lecher. Sing Zumo looked at the faint smile on his face and glanced at him. She snorted and turned to walk into the room. Li Yi smiled and shook his head. However, when he turned his head, an imperceptible disappointment appeared in his eyes. Hey, stop. He heard the voice behind him and turned around. A warm and fragrant body pressed against him. Sing Zumo's body left immediately, leaving behind a fragrance that didn't belong to any of the perfume from Rui Workshop lingering in his nose. Li Yi looked at her and murmured, I did hug, but it wasn't warm enough. Bah, lecher, shameless. Sing Zumo took a few steps back, her face even redder than before. Li Yi smiled, turned around, and walked out the door, waving his hand casually behind him. See you tomorrow. Sing Zumo watched his figure go away before withdrawing her gaze. She said in a daze, see you, tomorrow. Chapter 747. When Sing Zumo turned and walked into the room, there was a faint smile on her lips. Wan Ruoqing put on her clothes, got out of bed, and asked, he left. Sing Zumo nodded and walked over to help her up. She said softly, stay at home and rest for the next 2 days. Don't move around. Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, I'm not that delicate. It's just a knock. It won't hurt after a while. There are still things at the brothel that cannot be delayed. You should rest well. I'll go to the brothel. A teasing smile appeared on Sing Zumo's face. Sister Ruoqing, it doesn't hurt anymore, but I'm afraid someone else will. What are you talking about? Wan Ruoqing's face, which had already returned to normal, turned red again. Sing Zumo blinked her bright eyes and asked in a gossipy tone, you just said it wasn't the first time. What happened? Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, I told you before, it was at Qing Han Fu. That night at Ning Wang Fu, after I fainted that day, I was carried back by him. Sing Zumo finally remembered something. But at that time, a certain person was still a lecher in her heart. She only cared about Wan Ruoqing's physical condition. She blinked her eyes and asked again, is it really just like that? What else can it be? Wan Ruoqing glanced at her and asked, is there going to be a warm hug? Sing Zumo's face instantly became as red as blood. After coming back to her senses, she looked at her with some panic and embarrassment. Well, you dare to make fun of me. In embarrassment and anger, she reached out to tickle Ruoqing, but she didn't forget to divert some attention to avoid where Ruoqing was hurt. The two often played this kind of game. Usually, there were only them, Xiao Chui, and Xiao Zhu in the small courtyard, so they didn't have to avoid anything. Wan Ruoqing couldn't move freely today, so she was naturally at a disadvantage. After a round of confrontation, she was soon ridden by Tsingzumo. Panting slightly, she said with a smile, "Stop messing around." Tsingzumo pressed her down with one hand and put the other hand on her lower abdomen. "Tell me, do you still dare to make fun of me?" After the fight just now, both of their clothes were a bit messy. Although Tsingzumo had won, a large part of her shoulders were exposed. It was as if she had taken off Ruoqing's toenails, revealing her smooth and jade-like feet. She had tickled Ruoqing just like that. At this moment, the posture of the two was really charming. It was as if Ruoqing was lying on her back on the bed, and Tsingzumo was riding on her waist. It was very much like a legendary posture. Li walked in from outside and was slightly startled when he saw this scene. His gaze swept over the two of them and his throat moved involuntarily. After a long time, he said, "I just want to ask, do you still have Osmanthus cake?" The expressions of the two women on the bed froze at the same time. "If not, then forget it. I'll ask again tomorrow." "You guys continue." Li Yi turned around and strode out the door. He grabbed a pillow that flew out from inside and gently threw it back. It's not right to throw things around. It's not good to hit too many people. Even if it doesn't hit anyone, it's not good to hit flowers and plants. This time, the pillow flew out even faster and with even more force. Li Yi stood in the yard and stretched comfortably. The scene he saw yesterday still made his blood boil when he thought about it. No wonder Bai Ji had a poem called, "Holding the pipa and covering half of your face." Only when it was half covered could it be called temptation. It could leave a lot of room for imagination, and the more one thought about it, the more shameful it would be. Li Yi originally wanted to go to the city to see the new house this morning. Fong had selected a few according to his requirements, but the final choice was still up to Li Yi. When he got up, he felt as if he had forgotten something. After washing up, changing clothes, and walking out of the house, he finally understood when he saw the carriages coming from afar. He was afraid that today would not be peaceful. County Marquis Li has returned to the capital. Congratulations. An old man who looked like a butler came down from the carriage in front and said with a smile, "I'm here to congratulate you on behalf of my lord." "Your lord is?" "The Minister of Revenue." "Oh, it's Lord Qin." Li nodded. Before he could say a few more words, another person came up. "Deputy Minister Ma." Li cupped his hands. Li knew this person. During the investigation of the accounts, the Divination Academy and the Imperial Censorate had forged a deep friendship. Deputy Minister Ma was the second in the Imperial Censorate, and this time he came in person. Deputy Minister Ma smiled and said, "I'm very happy to hear that County Marquis Li has returned to the capital. I've prepared a small gift to show my respect. Please come in." The servants of the Li family had already come out and moved the things from the horse into the house. Li glanced at it casually. It was a small gift, but it didn't seem to be a small gift at all. The butler of the Qin's mansion and Deputy Minister Ma did not say much before they left. Before Li had time to drink water, another person came to visit. This time, it was the Shen family. Li did not have any friendship with Prime Minister Shen and the Shen family. Last time when the Liuli Glaze exhibition was held in the palace, the Shen family stood up and spoke for him. Although he did not know why they came to join in the fun, he could not neglect them. However, this was only the beginning. Li admitted that he had many enemies in the capital, but he also had many friends. This matter involved many factions in the imperial court and the struggle for interests. It was not something that could be explained clearly in a few words. He had some friendship with the Minister of Revenue and the Imperial Censorate. It was not surprising that the Wang family came. Of course, there was no need to mention the family of generals. Even the Shen family, thinking about it, it made sense. He had actually mentally prepared for these things the day before. However, when some officials and nobles he had never even seen before also came to offer gifts, he was truly surprised. Among these people, some were the parents of students in the academy and had a reason to visit. However, there were also some who had no relationship at all. The old woman of the Li family stood by his side. Seeing his confused expression, she patted his hand and said with a smile, "To be able to become a duke at your age is the first in decades. This is not strange at all. Ever since the founding of the country, unless there had been great achievements in expanding territory and benefiting thousands of years, the nobility had not been increased. Only some old officials who had toiled for the country their entire lives or fierce generals who had fought their entire lives would receive a small nobility before they died to protect their descendants. To be able to go from a commoner to repeatedly receiving the emperor's favor and become a duke in a short 2 or 3 years was an inconceivable matter. He was still very young and still had limitless potential. Given the emperor's high regard for him, who knew how far he could go in the future? It was better to make friends than to make enemies. In just one morning, the house's empty storage room was filled to the brim with gifts. Even so, there was still an unending stream of carriages coming in from outside, so much so that the servants of the Li family were somewhat overwhelmed. At this moment, Li Yi suddenly felt that there was no meaning in working so hard to expand his business. If he needed money, he would disappear for a few months. If he disappeared a few times a year, wouldn't he be able to become rich by accepting gifts? Chapter 748. The servants of the Li family moved carts after carts of gifts into the house. Li Yi stood in the yard, thinking of new ways to earn money. He couldn't keep disappearing. It would be fine if he disappeared once or twice, but people weren't fools. If he disappeared too many times, they might suspect that he was cheating. In this way, the reputation he had worked so hard to build would be ruined. He thought about it carefully. When he married Rui, he was in a daze and didn't even remember what happened. This was the first time he got married in his life. It was too hasty. He had to find a chance to hold a formal wedding in the future. He had to make it grand and earth-shattering. He had to invite the royal family, the Wang family, and any rich family in the capital. As for Li Xian, it would depend on how many gifts he gave. In this way, there would be many opportunities to receive gifts in the future. On second thought, it seemed that his birthday was coming. In the past 2 years, he had spent it with Rui and the others at home. Should he make a small celebration this year? Well, it was worth thinking about. "Young master, that room is full." Old Fong walked over and said with a surprised expression. It wasn't a festival today, but the number of people who came to send gifts almost reached the outside of the village. "Clean up another room." Li Yi waved his hand. When he was about to go out to have a look, he saw someone who surprised him. County Marquis Li. When he saw Li Yi again, Assistant Minister Wei's attitude was very humble. No matter how many gifts others gave, this Assistant Minister Wei of the Ministry of Rights was on the side of the King of Shu and had a close relationship with the Qin family. How could he come at this time? Was he attracted by my charisma and wanted to forsake darkness for light? Assistant Minister Wei glared at Wei Junliang and said angrily, "Unfilial son, apologize to County Marquis Li." One side of Wei Junliang's face was still swollen. He said in a trembling voice, "County Marquis Li, it's all my fault for offending you. Please forgive me." Although the two of them were about the same age, Wei Junliang didn't dare to treat the other person as someone who was on the same level as him. Wei Ji forced a smile and said, "Marquis, the compensation for the girl's clothes has already been delivered last night." After leaving the Qin family yesterday, the last glimmer of hope in his heart was extinguished. Although he had just been transferred to the capital not long ago, he had long heard of County Marquis Li's murderous methods. If they were targeted by him, even if he had the Qin family behind him, they could forget about having a good ending. Li Yi smiled and said, "Sir Wei is truly trustworthy." Wei Ji nodded repeatedly. Of course, seeing the two of them still standing there, Li Yi probed, does Sir Wei want to go in and have a cup of tea? Of course, the meaning of this sentence was not to invite them in for tea. To be precise, it should be, why are you still here? Do you want me to invite you in for a cup of tea? Wei Ji was a shrewd old man and his ability to read people's thoughts and body language was also first-rate. Naturally, he could understand what he was trying to say. County Marquis Li is busy, we'll go back first. Sir, you're back. A young man walked in from outside and looked at Li Yi with a happy expression. Then, he looked back and asked in confusion, Sir, is that the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Wei Ji? Li Yi patted Lu Yizhong's shoulder and said with a smile, You're already the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, don't call me sir. Lu Yizhong smiled and did not agree or refute. Some habits could not be changed in a short period of time. Moreover, he did not intend to change them. Isn't Wei Ji from the Qin family? A trace of doubt appeared on Lu Yizhong's face and he asked, Why is he here? Wei Ji patted his buttocks and left. Only now did Li Yi realize that this guy had only brought his son today. Visiting without giving a gift, how rude. I don't know. Hearing Lu Yizhong's words, he shook his head and said, I heard that Assistant Minister Wei spent 10,000 taels of silver to buy a piece of clothing. How extravagant. He's just a small assistant minister. His entire life's salary can't even add up to that much. I don't know where that money came from. When you go down, you have to be more careful. Corruption is not allowed. Lu Yizhong's status in the Secret Intelligence Bureau was not low. The Secret Intelligence Bureau was a sharp sword hanging above the heads of the officials. It was used to supervise and warn them. Fighting corruption was also one of their duties. Lu Yizhong was startled for a moment before nodding and saying, This subordinate will remember. Originally, he had planned to go out early today to look at the residence and then inspect the shops and fences. Looking at the situation outside, this plan would probably have to be put on hold for the time being. He would have to wait until the afternoon to see what the situation was like. I heard that you slapped Qin Yu again in the restaurant yesterday. That was really satisfying. It's a pity that I wasn't there. Li Xian strode in with a regretful expression on his face. His personality was that of a bystander. He could even kick the king of Shu twice. He had even beaten up Qin Yu once before. What kind of sin did young Duke Qin commit? As the saying goes, those who do too much evil will bring about their own destruction. He always liked to steal other people's wives. Every time he went out, he would either be slapped or seriously injured. This was retribution. After establishing the Academy of Sciences, Li Xian became a true scientific maniac. He couldn't usually see the heir's wife since she was in the palace. He could only vent all his energy on research. Li Xian didn't come alone. His brother-in-law, Wang Yong, followed behind him. He stepped forward and said to Li Yi apologetically, I'm really sorry. I have already punished Wang Yu for what happened yesterday. I hope Brother Li doesn't take it to heart. How could I? If a child is disobedient, I can just hang him up and give him a beating. Li Yi wasn't someone who liked to hold grudges. He waved his hand to show that he didn't care. Let's talk inside. Wang Yong probably came to discuss matters related to cooperation with him. As a friendly business partner, his attitude towards him was naturally better. After the tea was served, Wang Yong only took a sip and went straight to the point. He described in detail to Li Yi about the matters related to the colored glass business in the past few months. A few months ago, when Li Yi left the capital, it happened to be the day when the Wang family's colored glass bazaar ended. The number of colored glass sold at the bazaar was carefully planned to not only meet the needs of the rich in the capital, but also not appear to be common and cause the price to fall. The royal family, the Wang family, and the Li family made a lot of money in those days. After that, in order to ensure continuous profits, except for the occasional small amount of colored glass sold by the Wang family around the capital, there were no more large-scale sales of colored glass. Waves of foreign merchants walked out of the capital, leaving their footprints all over the Jing kingdom. They walked out of the Jing kingdom and went to the world, so that the light of the rising sun could shine further. I don't know what channel the Cui family has used, but they have also accumulated a lot of colored glass in their hands. Wang Yong frowned slightly and said, although they haven't been released for the time being, I heard that the Cui family will hold a colored glass appreciation conference in the capital in a few days. This is not good news for us. Li Yi certainly knew how the Cui family got their colored glass, and he had been paying attention to the news from the Cui family. However, he did not know that the Cui family was also going to hold a colored glass appreciation conference. It seemed that even if there was an intelligent system, sometimes it was not as well informed as these century-old clans. The Cui family actually had a lot of businesses under their name, and they were involved in a wide range of fields. The Li family almost had an absolute monopoly on the business of perfume and spirits, but there were not too many secrets in the area of ready-made clothing or weaving. There were countless imitators, and the Cui family was the largest imitator. Even if the quality and reputation of the imitators were not comparable, it would still more or less affect the business of the Cui family. Miss Singh also complained to him yesterday that these imitators with bad intentions used inferior materials at low prices and had a very bad reputation among the customers, affecting the entire ready-made clothing circle. It seemed that during the days when he was not in the capital, the Cui family was jumping around quite happily. Colored Glass Appreciation Conference. Li Yi smiled and murmured, it seems that it's time to release a large number of foreign merchants. Wang Yong's face showed a puzzled expression. He looked at him and asked, a large number of what? Even if he made some small mistakes, he will only be fined a few months' salary at most. Your Majesty, what are you saying? How could this subject be disappointed? This subject can't be more than happy for your Majesty to have an uncorrupted official like Assistant Minister Wei. Li Yi said with a disappointed expression. All right, stop pretending in front of me. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, you have nothing to do at home these days. You might as well go to the palace to accompany Shaning and Yongning. They are close to you. As a princess, you can't run out of the palace every day. A place like the palace was too depressing and was not suitable for children to live in. However, the two little girls had different identities and could not go out of the palace every day. In fact, when they were at home, it was quite lively and noisy. It was like a family. Rui also liked the two little girls. Recently, she liked children more and more. When Li Yi walked out of the imperial garden, two small figures, each carrying a small school bag, were already waiting for him outside. They did not need to stay in the palace all day. Every day, they would be sent to the Princess Royal's Women's College at a fixed time. Of course, due to their identities, they had specialized female teachers there and did not have many opportunities to interact with other people. Goodbye, Imperial Father. The proud Lolita waved at Emperor Jing from afar. Li Yi held one of them in each hand and walked out of the palace. Emperor Jing looked in that direction for a long time until the figures of one big and two small figures completely disappeared. Only then did he withdraw his gaze. His face showed some envy. Changde hesitated for a moment and went forward to say, County Marquis Li said that if you move out of the palace, it will be very beneficial to your body. Recently, the weather has been hot. Your Majesty, why not move to Xiujiang Courtyard? Emperor Jing looked around and saw the tall palace walls. His expression was a little sad. He murmured, I also want to. Li Yi had already decided on the new residence 2 days ago. It was not far from the mathematics college. The place was very big and the environment was quiet. It was the most suitable for a vacation and nurturing the fetus. The original owner was a wealthy merchant in the capital. He originally refused to sell it, but after hearing who was buying the residence, he completed all the procedures on the same day. The new residence could not be moved in immediately. Before that, Li had to spend a few days to redecorate the inside so that it would be comfortable to live in. He had already thought about it. When the time came, he would not bring so many people to the new residence. He would only bring a few servant girls to be responsible for the daily cleaning work. As for taking care of Rui, he could do it himself. Speaking of which, he had been taken care of by others for 2 lifetimes. Now, he had truly learned to take care of others. Of course, he had to thank Mississippi Lu. In the Qi Kingdom, when she was injured and he raised her like a pig, he cooked and brewed medicine every day. From time to time, he would take her out to relax, chat with her, and sleep with her. He had never taken care of anyone like this before. It had also changed some of Li Yi's carelessness. All right. Husband, I really can't drink anymore, Rui said helplessly as she put down the spoon. Drink another mouthful. Li Yi picked up the spoon and blew on it before carefully reaching it over. He had brewed this soup for a long time. It was very nourishing and was most suitable for a pregnant woman to drink. Of course, one could drink it even if they were not pregnant. This soup had a comprehensive effect and tasted good. Xiao Huan had already drunk 2 small bowls. After drinking the last mouthful, Rui refused to drink any more no matter what. Li Yi saw that there was still quite a lot left in the soup bowl. It would be a waste to pour it away. After all, he had spent a lot of effort on this soup. He then turned to look at Xiao Huan. The little servant girl touched her slightly bulging belly and said pitifully, "Young master, I can't drink any more." Li Yi shook his head. When he was about to pour the soup bowl out, he paused. Mississippi Lu was not practicing her swordsmanship in the courtyard. She put autumn water aside and sat by the stone table. She stared blankly in a certain direction. This scene made Li Yi's expression become a little dazed. It was as if he had returned to the small courtyard beside Fonglin Park. In the past, she rarely stared blankly like this. However, he did not know when it started, but Li Yi often saw this scene in front of him. The girl had grown up and had something on her mind. Mississippi Lu was not like Xiao Huan. Everything was written on her face. Although the two of them were very familiar with each other, it was undeniable that Li Yi had never seen through her thoughts. Drink some soup. Li Yi walked over with a small bowl and placed it on the stone table. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and did not say anything. It's delicious and nourishing. Li Yi looked at her and said, "Your body has not completely recovered. You should drink more." "I'm not drinking. Just drink a mouthful. I'll give you the white rabbit creamy decoction later." Li Yi habitually pinched her chin. After blowing on it, he passed the spoon over. Mississippi Lu opened her mouth and also habitually swallowed. Then, Li Yi's hand froze. She seemed to have realized something. She lowered her head and looked down, but there was no expression on her face. This scene had actually happened often in the past. She would never go along with Li Yi's character. Whenever something happened, she would first resist a little and then reluctantly give in. For a long time, she had been drinking medicine like this. She drank a mouthful of medicine and was rewarded with a white rabbit creamy decoction. The two of them were used to this kind of transaction. However, just now, they seemed to have forgotten that this was no longer the Qi Kingdom. It was no longer the small courtyard beside Fragrant Forest Park where only the two of them resided. Sorry. It was a habit. Li Yi was the first to react. He quickly retracted his hand and did not let her drink the soup. He was ready to run away at any time. Mississippi Lu did not have any special reaction. She only glanced at him and said calmly, "Put it down." "Ha! Put the soup down," Mississippi Lu repeated. After making sure that she was not angry at all, Lee put down the bowl and looked at her in surprise. This wasn't her style at all. Mississippi Lou glanced at him. "Why are you still here?" Lee looked at her and said, "You're a little strange today." Holding autumn water in her hand, Mississippi Lou narrowed her beautiful eyes and asked, "How strange?" "Strange." Seeing that the familiar Mississippi Lou had returned, Lee took a step back and said with a smile, "You're quite pretty." Chapter 750. You're a little weird today. How so? You're so pretty. This sentence could even be used as a golden phrase to pick up girls in the future. Although the girl would not burst with joy after receiving such a compliment, she would still feel a little happy. However, in today's era, any girl who stopped a random girl on the street and said the same thing would definitely not feel shy or happy. Scolding her as a lecher would be considered a light punishment, and if it was serious, a slap would be very likely. Mississippi Lou took a small sip of the soup and looked up at Lee. She asked, "What did you say just now?" "I didn't hear you clearly." "I said, you're pretty good today." An upright person was not afraid of a crooked shadow. At times like this, Lee's expression was serious and his words were righteous. He did not feel guilty at all. "I wasn't pretty in the past." Lee was surprised that Mississippi Lou could say such a thing. It was a free question. He shook his head and said, "I was pretty in the past too. Then what's nice about me today?" Mississippi Lou looked at him and asked, "Am I as pretty as Miss Sing in Willow Lane?" This was a free question. The sun was a little dazzling today. It was so dazzling that Lee could not see Mississippi Lou's pretty face clearly. "Oh my, the sun is really poisonous today. It's so bright that I'm going blind. I can't see or hear anything." Fong closed his eyes and stood in the courtyard. He fumbled around with his hands. When he felt his way out of the courtyard, he even tripped on the steps and almost fell down. He was still complaining. Pretentious. Lee looked at Fong in disdain as he stumbled out. He turned back to look at Mississippi Lou and curled his lips. "It's cloudy today. Where did the sun come from? Why don't you find a good reason to lie?" Lee looked at the door worriedly and said, "Maybe there's something wrong with Fong's eyes and ears." "I'll go take a look." Fong walked in from outside again. He scratched his head and said, "I forgot to tell you that those people have returned from Suzhou." He handed a letter to Lee and said, "This was given to second miss by Miss Yang Liuqing. Miss Yang didn't come back with them this time. It seems that she left alone in Suzhou." After saying that, he looked up at the sky and waved his hands in the air as he groped his way out of the courtyard. Lee, Mississippi Lou, as well as Fong and the others, had set off before the rest of the crowd. They had traveled day and night, so naturally, they had to return to the capital first. The remaining team of nearly 100 people came back from Suzhou under the leadership of Yang Liuqing. However, Fong just said that she didn't come back with the others. Lee walked over and handed the envelope to Mississippi Lou. "This is for you." He thought that since those people had returned, the materials donated by the King of Shu should have arrived. It was a lot of money. How should he spend it? "I've finished drinking. Remember to wash the dishes." After a while, Mississippi Lou had finished reading the letter. She put it on the table and stood up. She didn't argue with Lee about what had just happened. She turned around and went back to her room. Lee picked up the letter in surprise and looked at it. After a while, he slowly put it down. He glanced at the closed door of Mississippi Lou's room and frowned slightly. Yang Liuqing had left. Just as suddenly as she came, she left just as suddenly. She didn't say where she went, nor did she say whether she would come back. She just thanked Mississippi Lou in the letter for teaching her martial arts in the past 2 years. These 2 years were the happiest 2 years of her life. She would never forget all of this. She would always have such a master. She couldn't repay the kindness of giving her a new life. There was nothing else in the letter after that. Li Yi's index finger gently tapped on the table. A look of reminiscence appeared on his face. "Excuse me, does Rui Lu live here?" The young girl who was about the same age as Mississippi Lu appeared before him more than a year ago. She carried a small bag on her back and held a long sword in her hand. The cold expression on her face was exactly the same as Mississippi Lu's. At that time, she wanted to challenge Rui, who was ranked first on the hero ranking board. She talked about the rules of Jianghu every time she opened her mouth. After losing to Rui, she wholeheartedly wanted to be her master. Although Mississippi Lu didn't agree, Li Yi was still a little surprised at her perseverance. Every day before dawn, she would come over to boil water, chop firewood, and clean the courtyard. She almost took care of all the chores in the house. Before her, Mississippi Lu was the most hard-working person that Li Yi had ever seen. After her, Li Yi had never seen anyone who worked harder than her. She seemed to be carrying a heavy burden that had been buried in the bottom of her heart. She had never revealed it to anyone. In the past 2 years, the only thing that she had done was to continuously surpass herself. From a petty thief who knew some kung fu, she had now become a top-notch master. Although she was still a long way from becoming a master or a master like Mississippi Lu, the speed of her improvement was too fast. She had a bright future ahead of her. Even now, she was ranked at the top of the heaven ranking board. Li Yi didn't know what she was carrying that made her so strict with herself. She was curious about the reason why Yang Liuqing left, but she was more concerned about Mississippi Lu's feelings. Her cold and unapproachable face was just a facade. She was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. She never talked much. She would prove everything with her actions. If she hadn't recognized her as a disciple from the bottom of her heart, she wouldn't have spent so much effort to cultivate her. Although she didn't show it on the surface, when she left just now, Li Yi saw some different expressions on her face. Shuzhou, Li Yi had always known that Yang Liuqing had a secret. Especially on the way back from the Qi Kingdom, this feeling became stronger. Thinking of something, Li Yi walked out and entered another small yard. Second granduncle was asleep on the rocking chair. The sloppy old man squatted far away, flipping through a yellowed book. When Li Yi walked over, he didn't even notice it until Li Yi coughed softly. He hurriedly stuffed the book into his sleeve, raised his head and asked, "What's wrong? Are you going out?" As a martial arts grandmaster, it was inconceivable that he would need a reminder to realize that someone was approaching him. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "What book are you reading, Su? You're so engrossed in it." Hearing this, the sloppy old man straightened up and said with a smile, "A profound martial arts secret book. You won't understand it even if I tell you. It turns out that the men and women in the profound martial arts secret books don't wear clothes." Li Yi didn't expect him to be so reserved at such an old age. With his status and strength as a guru, he still needed to rely on this kind of book to solve his personal problems. He said with a smile, "Su, if you like it, I'll give you some more profound secret books next time. The color pages are very precious." Having seen more real and exciting things, although he was not very interested in those traditional picture books, it was still very easy for him to get a few. The sloppy old man said seriously, "You misunderstood. This is really a secret book, I know." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, Su. I won't tell anyone." If the news that a Wulin guru liked to read erotic books was released, the sales of Wulin tabloids would definitely increase greatly. After smiling, Li Yi's face became serious and he asked, "Does Su know something about Yang Liuqing?" The sloppy old man was about to explain. Hearing this, he looked at him and asked, "What happened to her?" "She left, so I want to know something about her." Li Yi told him about Yang Liuqing's departure. If this matter had no beginning and no end, he was afraid that Mississippi Lou would always feel uncomfortable. The sloppy old man thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "The martial arts she used seemed to be from an old guy in the Wu Kingdom." The Wu Kingdom. Li Yi frowned slightly. The sloppy old man looked a little nostalgic and nodded. "If I'm right, she should have some relationship with the royal family of the Wu Kingdom." Chapter 751. The Royal Family of the Wu Kingdom. The expression on Li Yi's face had already turned into one of astonishment. This world was completely different from the history he knew, including the current countries and all kinds of major events that had happened in history. Since the wheel of history had gone awry, he couldn't find anything that he could refer to. Of course, last time, he had stored all the books in Hongwen Library in his head, so he was not unfamiliar with the current situation of the surrounding countries. There were a total of 3 countries that directly bordered the Jing Kingdom. Needless to say, the Qi Kingdom and the Zhao Kingdom had been in constant conflict with the Jing Kingdom in history, and the current situation was still a little tense. The other country was the Wu Kingdom. Although the Jing Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom could not be called allies, there had not been much conflict before. For decades, they had not invaded each other. The 4 countries had always maintained a delicate balance between them. The Qi Kingdom was indeed powerful and ambitious, so it was guarded against by other countries. But it was impossible for it to be the enemy of several countries at the same time. Even if the Zhao Kingdom cooperated with them for a short time, they had their own ideas, and it was impossible for them to be of one heart and one mind. The relationship between the Jing Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom had always been stable. For a long time, there was not much difference in the strength of the 2 countries. However, several years ago, a certain prince of the Wu Kingdom launched a coup without any warning, killed his brother and father, and sat on the throne himself. Since then, the Wu Kingdom had been in a long period of turmoil. The loyal officials in the court were either dead or hiding. Several generals guarding the border, with the reason of bringing order to the chaos and supporting the legitimate wife, gathered troops and rebelled against the court. There were also countless rebel armies in the country, forming a group of heroes and forming a separatist regime, which gave the current court of the Wu Kingdom a headache. These words were once again confirmed by the sloppy old man. Li Yi had known for a long time that Monster Su was from the Wu Kingdom. However, when one's martial arts cultivation reached such a realm, most of them would choose to go out and travel in order to make a breakthrough in their lifetime. As a result, the concept of countries and the like was much more vague. After the former emperor was assassinated, Empress Wendy also committed suicide. After gaining power, the second prince killed the crown prince with a cup of poisoned wine. Empress Wendy's youngest son and the 14-year-old Princess Duanrong disappeared. They must have been hidden by the ministers loyal to the former emperor. The sloppy old man just narrated slowly without any extra expression on his face. How could that old fellow Yang Wanli just watch such a thing happen? Did something happen to him? Li Yi looked at him and asked with a frown. "Su means," the sloppy old man said, "Yang is the surname of the Wu Kingdom, and that little girl knows Yang Wanli's famous technique. Even if she isn't a member of the royal family, she must be related to that old fellow." This was all he could get from the sloppy old man. Li Yi thought for a while. Although she was young and was good at doing those rough jobs, if he thought about it carefully, he would find that apart from these things, she always seemed to hide some kind of temperament. Inadvertently, it overlapped with a girl who liked to eat egg-fried rice. The next time he entered the palace, he would ask the eldest princess about the situation in the Wu Kingdom. The royal family must have some secret ancient books that he couldn't see. When Li Yi walked back, he glanced at the tightly closed door of Mississippi Lou's room and felt a slight headache. Her only disciple had left without saying goodbye. She definitely wouldn't feel good in her heart. Furthermore, she was the kind of person who kept everything in her heart and wouldn't tell anyone. Even if he wanted to make her happy, he didn't know how to break through from this angle. Rui was like this when she was young. She kept everything in her heart. When father and mother left, she didn't cry. She didn't eat or drink. She just sat by the bed in a daze for 3 days. Rui looked at him and shook her head. If she has something on her mind, she won't listen to anyone. Li showed a helpless expression and said, if she keeps it in her heart for a long time, it will cause problems. Don't worry, husband. I'll talk to her tomorrow. Rui smiled and brought the wooden basin over. She put it by the bed and tested the temperature of the water. She said, husband, soak your feet first. Ever since Rui got pregnant, she was not allowed to intervene in any of the family's matters. With her physique, as long as she was not fighting another grandmaster, she would not be affected at all. However, this was an order from the old mistress. Xiao Huan followed her every day because the old mistress could not stay idle and wanted to do something. She had cried a few times. However, during the days when Li Yi came back, she would fetch a basin of hot water every night and wash his feet personally. Li Yi looked down at her delicate side profile. His eyes were in a trance and he suddenly jumped off the bed. Rui seemed to be a little scared. She looked up at him and asked in confusion, husband, you used to wash my feet. Today, it's my turn to wash my wife's feet. Li Yi looked at her and pointed to the bed. He said, sit down. How can I do that? Husband, how can you? Rui shook her head repeatedly. Li Yi picked her up and put her on the bed. He said, it's natural for a husband to wash your wife's feet. Why can't you do that? Come on, sit down, the water was just right. Li Yi slowly took off her shoes and sock and soaked her feet in the wooden tub. Her feet were delicate and as white as jade. Her toes were neatly arranged like round pearls. Li Yi reached out to hold them and could feel that her body was a little stiff. Although he had helped her wash her feet many times, it was the first time he did something like this. She couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Li Yi didn't show any abnormality. He lowered his head and was patient and careful. The woman in front of him was his wife. She was the closest person to him in this world. Compared to what she had done for him, this was really nothing. At first, he thought that he had always been honest in his previous life. He didn't do anything evil. But the heavens sent him to a place like this. He had no family, no friends, and nothing familiar. Was it too much? After experiencing so many things, that thought had long since been annihilated without a trace. This was not a punishment, but a gift. Many images appeared in his mind. In the end, there were still many people here who loved him and were worthy of his love. For example, this quiet woman in front of him. She was his wife, a small life that belonged to them, and was about to descend into this world. Rui was perfect. Her appearance was unparalleled, and her martial arts skills were unparalleled. She was always so quiet and tranquil. She never had any temper tantrums. She would silently guard behind you and only appear when you needed her. She satisfied all the fantasies a man had about his other half. At this time, she sat quietly on the bed and he washed her feet. After a while, they were able to sleep in each other's arms. Li Yi felt that his luck was really damn good. Lu Rui, it should be from that night in Willow Leaf Village. The moment the vague figure standing outside the door said this, his good luck began. Lowering her head to look at his serious expression, her body gradually relaxed. She placed one hand on her lower abdomen and used the other to help him tame a strand of his hair. The corner of her mouth revealed a smile that could charm all living things. Thank you, my husband. Li Yi raised his head and said, just a word of thanks. It's not sincere, a pair of soft arms wrapped around his neck. While Li Yi was still in a daze, he felt a cold sensation on his lips. How about this? She rarely took the initiative. Her pretty face was like a blooming flower. Not long after, Li Yi sat by the stone table in the courtyard and looked at the ridiculously round moon in the sky. The night was long, and he couldn't sleep. Chapter 752. Li Yi lay on the rocking chair. The servant girl placed 2 peeled eggs in front of his eyes and rolled them gently. Yesterday, he only felt a little sleepy after sitting in the courtyard until late at night. Li Yi felt that it was time to consider the matter of Rui and sleeping in separate rooms. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to sleep in the future. "Young master, are we going to move soon?" The servant girl put down the eggs and moved her little hand on his head. Her voice was soft. Li Yi nodded. "Yes, pack your things for the next 2 days. We'll be moving to the city soon." The servant girl nodded obediently. For her, as long as she could be with the young master and miss, it didn't matter where they moved. Creak. The door of Mississippi Lu's room opened. She walked out of the room. Xiao Huan looked down at the young master with dark circles under his eyes and then looked at her. She picked up the 2 boiled eggs and shook them. "Second miss, do you want eggs?" Yang Liuqing was probably the outsider that Mississippi Lu treated the most carefully. In fact, ever since she became Rui's disciple, Li Yi had never treated her as an outsider. She left without saying goodbye. Even he felt a little uncomfortable in his heart, let alone Mississippi Lu. He still wanted to figure out the ins and outs of this matter. "Yang Liuqing, the little disciple of your second miss." Mingzu ate the shrimp fried rice that Li Yi brought over and looked up at him. "What about her? Help me check if there is anyone with the same name as her among the royal family or nobles of the Wu kingdom." Li Yi said and then opened his mouth. The arrogant Lolita put a peeled shrimp into his mouth. This was not the era of the developed internet in the future. It was easy to search for the needed information on the internet. It would be more troublesome for Li Yi to do this on his own. The royal family always had some special channels. Of course, these weren't things that Li Yi could easily come into contact with. Mingzi nodded and looked at the white-haired old woman beside her. "Nanny, please make a trip." The old woman nodded and looked at Li Yi meaningfully. Then, she turned and left. The arrogant Lolita peeled another shrimp for Li Yi. Then, she hugged his arm and said coquettishly, "Sir, can you take us out of the palace today?" She was already 13 years old, almost 14 years old, and her body had begun to develop. Naturally, she had to pay more attention to her behavior. Concubine Yan had always been strict with her etiquette education, but when she saw Li Yi, she revealed her playful nature and no longer had any royal manners. Seeing that Li Yi was unmoved, she hurriedly winked at Yongning, who was chewing on the pork ribs. Although Yongning was young, she had always been Shanning's little follower. She could understand her meaning with one look. She put down the pork ribs and hugged Li Yi's other arm. She blinked her big, watery eyes and looked at him pitifully. Who could resist these 2 pairs of extremely cute and innocent big eyes? Li Yi sighed slightly and nodded helplessly. "Sir is the best." The Tsundra Lolita jumped up and kissed him on the cheek. When there were no outsiders around, she would return to this little girl's temperament. Yongning also came over. Her mouth was still stained with oil. She blushed and kissed the other side of Li Yi's face. Although she was much younger than the arrogant Lolita, she was quieter because of her experience and was far less playful. "Yongning, hurry up. Let's go change." The arrogant Lolita pulled Yongning and ran out of the morning dew hall. A group of palace maids followed behind in a panic and shouted, "Your Highness, slow down." Concubine Liang had passed away early. Yongning was still young and would be afraid to live alone in the palace. Li Yi suggested to the old emperor to let her live with the arrogant Lolita and be taught by concubine Yan. Although Shanning was playful, she still took good care of this little sister. Mingzu put down the bowl and looked at him. She asked, "Did you see father today?" "No." Li Yi shook his head. He came today mainly to ask her about Yangliuking. He also wanted to see Yongning and the arrogant Lolita. He did not see the old emperor. Mingzu suddenly looked at him and hid the trace of hope in her eyes. She asked, "Is there really no way to cure father's body?" In her heart, he was still the omnipotent Li Yi who could solve anything. Li Yi paused while peeling the prawns. The atmosphere became a little stifling. Even in the future, the old emperor's illness was incurable. He had tried his best to change it, but he could only slow down or slightly extend his life. He was not a god, and there was nothing he could do. Li Yi sighed and said, "If I can move out of the palace and put aside all political affairs to recuperate, the situation might be much better." Although it was impossible to cure this illness completely, it would not kill him immediately. It was important to maintain a good mood. The palace was like a huge cage. It was too oppressive and lacked people. Even though most of the political affairs were handed over to the two prime ministers, the country was too big. As the emperor, there were too many things he had to deal with every day. When Li Yi talked to him, he would often ignore his identity as the emperor. Occasionally, he would joke around as a form of adjustment. This was the tacit understanding they had developed over a long period of time. However, the effect was only temporary. If the old emperor could immediately put down the burden on his shoulders and find a quiet place outside the capital with beautiful mountains and rivers, he could lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun when he had nothing to do. If he was in the mood, he could go to the brothels to play mahjong with Chang or find a few old ladies to dance in the square. He could not say that he would live to a ripe old age, but he could definitely live for a few more years. However, Li Yi could not mention this method, and neither could the imperial physician. Even they knew it very well. "Father, he is very tired." Mingzu lowered her head. Her face was a little gloomy, but then she raised her head and said seriously, "I will try to persuade father." Li Yi nodded. She was probably the only one who could raise such matters with the old emperor. There was a short silence between the two of them. Then, the sound of footsteps approached from afar. The white-haired old woman came over with a thick stack of books in her arms. She put them on the table. "These are all the information about the Wu Kingdom." Mingzu looked at Li Yi and said, "Take these books back and read them slowly. Remember to return them when you are done. It won't take much effort to find someone." Li Yi shook his head. Since these books were not for the public, it was better to leave them here to avoid bringing her unnecessary trouble. He picked up a book and casually flipped through the pages. He was so fast that the old woman standing to the side could not see clearly. In the time it took to take 2 breaths, he picked up another book and repeated what he did just now. Mingzu had already seen his reading speed, so she was no longer surprised. "What are you doing?" The white-haired old woman looked at him with a face full of confusion. Li Yi casually replied, "Reading. You can memorize it like this." The old woman was puzzled. At this speed, she could not even see the words on the pages clearly. "I am just looking for something. There is no need to memorize it." Li Yi could not tell her that even the action of flipping the pages was unnecessary. As long as he touched these books, he would remember all the content in the book. Wouldn't he be regarded as a monster? The white-haired old woman looked at him as if she was looking at a monster. After he flipped through several books, the sound of flipping pages finally stopped. Li Yi's eyes stopped on a certain page. Found it. He looked at some information recorded on it, and his eyes slightly narrowed. Chapter 753. Have a look. Li Yi put a few pieces of paper on the table in front of Mississippi Liu. He had just copied them from the palace. Most of them were secrets of the Wu Kingdom. Of course, in this era where information was blocked, secrets for the people of the Jing kingdom were not secrets in the Wu kingdom. Several years ago, the current emperor of the Wu kingdom, who was only the second prince at that time, killed his father and took the throne as he wished. After he took the throne, the first thing he did was, of course, to eliminate the remaining supporters who were loyal to the late emperor and would rather die than submit. Then, he killed his elder brother, the eldest legitimate son of the emperor of the Wu kingdom and Empress Wendy, who was also the crown prince of the Wu kingdom at that time, with a cup of poisoned wine. This was a normal action. No emperor would leave alive a person who could threaten his position. And there was more than one person who could threaten him. The emperor of the Wu kingdom and Empress Wendy had 2 sons and a daughter. As the eldest son, the former crown prince was killed. Princess Duanrong, who was only 14 years old, and the young prince disappeared without any news. Some people said that they were secretly executed by the emperor of the Wu kingdom after the usurpation. Some people also said that they were hidden by the ministers who were loyal to the late emperor, waiting for the day when they could set things right and help the young prince to regain the throne. Some people also said that they were imprisoned in the Deep Palace. In short, whether in the Wu kingdom or in other countries, there were many speculations about this matter. But obviously, none of the speculations was confirmed. From the information collected in the palace, Li Yi learned that the daughter of the emperor of the Wu kingdom and the queen was titled Princess Duanrong, and her name was Yang Liuqing. At that time, Li Yi finally understood what the unsmiling girl who was unbelievably strict with him was carrying on her back then. Did she want to go back to take revenge after learning martial arts? The possibility was so small that it was almost negligible. How could the security around the emperor of a country be weak? Even a grandmaster would not be able to easily sneak into the palace to commit regicide. Moreover, her strength was still a long way from that of a grandmaster. The possibility of her taking revenge on her own was too small. Of course, the current her was no longer the rash young girl from 2 years ago. She would definitely not do something like striking a rock with an egg. He had already asked the eldest princess to pay more attention to the whereabouts of that Princess Duanrong of the Wu kingdom. The Jing kingdom definitely had people who specialized in collecting such information in the Wu kingdom. I've already asked someone to keep an eye on her. Li Yi saw that Mississippi. Lu was silent, so he asked with concern, "Are you all right?" His disciple, who left without saying goodbye, was actually a princess of a country, and could be considered as half a princess of a subjugated country. Li Yi could not understand Mississippi Lu's feelings at the moment. Although she was usually strict on the surface, they were about the same age, and their temperaments were like carved from the same mold. The relationship between master and disciple in this era was far from what the future generations could understand. Mississippi Lu never did things without a beginning, so Li Yi was really worried that she would run away without a word one day. "It's okay." Mississippi Lu put away the pieces of paper, stood up, and said, "I see. Are you really fine?" Li Yi looked at her. Why did she have to pull a long face? At this time, he forgot that Mississippi Lu always had a straight face. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, "What do you think will happen?" Li Yi looked at her and said with a smile, "Just smile when it's okay. It's not good to always have a cold face, boring." Mississippi Lu glanced at him indifferently and walked straight in front of him. When she walked past Li Yi reached out and tugged at her cheeks. It was still the same bouncy face that he was familiar with. No matter what expression she put on, the corners of her lips still curled up. She stood there in a daze, as if she did not expect that he would dare to do such a bold thing in this place that was no longer the kingdom of Qi. Damn it, why is the sunlight so dazzling recently? I can't see again. Fong closed his eyes and touched his hands randomly. He actually found the position of the door accurately, and his figure disappeared in an instant. Those people have even begun to imitate the style of our ready-made clothes now. They use inferior cloth, rough production, and the price is low. Our business has been affected, but they are backed by those big families, and we can't afford to offend them. It's better not to cause more trouble. Tsingzumo said a few words and looked at Li Yi sitting on the chair with an abnormal expression. She asked in confusion, "What's wrong with you?" "It's nothing. I'm a little tired sitting down. Let's talk on my stomach." Li Yi stood up with the help of the chair and lay on the small bed next to him. His butt was not touching the chair, and he immediately felt much more comfortable. More importantly, there was a faint fragrance on the small bed, which reminded him of the not very warm hug that day. It was the same smell. When have we ever been afraid of trouble? After changing to a comfortable position, Li Yi looked at her and said, "It's just the Chui family. In this capital city, there is no one we can't offend except the emperor. Don't worry, the Chui family won't be able to jump around for long. Get up." Tsingzumo forgot about the business at this time, and walked over with a little blush. How could a woman's bed be casually slept by others? Although this was only a studio, she would usually rest here when she was tired from painting. She slept here more often than in her bed in her room. If others saw this, they might think of her. Of course, this others only referred to someone who would tease her because of this. Seeing that Tsingzumo had already grabbed his arm and pulled him off the bed, Li Yi quickly said, "Isn't it just lying down for a while? Don't be so stingy." He couldn't sit down now. Yesterday, he pinched Mississippi Lou's face, and she chased after him until his butt was swollen. He suspected that she was using him to vent her anger. She didn't touch anywhere and only kicked his butt. Although it wasn't hurt, it would at least hurt for a day or two. This grudge had been formed, and he remembered it in his heart. In the future, he would return it 10 times or even 100 times. Get off. Seeing him being so shameless, Tsingzumo was a little angry. She couldn't help but think of the 2 times he saw her naked body, but she pretended that nothing had happened. He was also shameless. He even said to Sini that he wanted to marry her, but now, in short, after being stimulated by him at this moment, the Luo Shui goddess had mixed feelings in her heart. There was an indescribable feeling. Naturally, she couldn't move Li Yi with her strength, so she simply took off her embroidered shoes, jumped onto the bed, and wanted to push him off. In a moment of desperation, she pushed the wrong position, and one hand pressed on Li Yi's butt. Ouch! A sharp pain came. Li Yi's body straightened, and the expression on his face twitched. He grabbed Tsingzumo's wrist and gritted his teeth. Don't touch there." Her wrist was grasped by a strong hand. After a moment of daze, Tsingzumo's face quickly turned red. She seemed to have discovered something and asked, "Why?" Li Yi gritted his teeth. "I accidentally hurt myself yesterday." One of Tsingzumo's hands was held by him. She looked at him, then looked down, and suddenly pressed her other hand on his butt. At this moment, she even forgot about the boundaries between men and women. She only thought that this shameless man had always bullied her, and now she finally had a chance to get back at him. Li Yi's eyes widened. The pain this time was even more intense than before. His hand loosened, and she easily broke free. Seeing him like this, Tsingzumo's pretty face revealed a hint of smugness. "You have this day too," she thought with such pleasure in her heart. "Are you going to get down or not?" She raised a hand and pretended to hit him. Li Yi's eyelids twitched. He subconsciously held her hand and turned over. However, he didn't expect that Tsingzumo would be driven by this force and fall straight down, pressing on top of him. As a result, Li Yi's butt came into intimate contact with the bed, and because there was another person on top of him, it was even closer. At this moment, he felt that he had come to hell. However, the next moment, all the pain seemed to disappear, and he felt as if he had gone from hell to heaven in an instant. Her soft body pressed against his, but their lips didn't touch, but their faces were indeed close together. An even clearer fragrance came to his face. Li Yi could feel her breathing and heartbeat. When he opened his eyes, he saw a pink and white jade neck. The reason why it was pink and white was because this skin was turning from white to pink. The whole world seemed to quiet down at this moment. At the door of the studio, the little servant girl with her hair combed into a bun put her thumb in her mouth and quietly moved a little to the side. Then, she opened her eyes wide. Chapter 754. Li Yi was no longer unfamiliar with this delicate body on top of him. Although there were two beautiful accidents, they were only visual impacts. This kind of skin tightly pressed together, and he could feel her rapid heartbeat. It was far more exciting than a hug that was not exactly warm. With the soft body in his arms and so close to her, Li Yi's expression was a bit dazed. He seemed to instinctively hold her slender waist. Summer clothes were thin to begin with. She was wearing a thin dress at the moment. Even through the clothes, she could still feel that kind of slippery feeling. Xing Zumo had struggled to prop herself up. Her face was full of shame and anger, as if she would explode in the next moment. However, at a certain moment, a strange feeling came from her waist, causing her body to tremble slightly. She lowered her head and looked at him in disbelief. His expression was a bit dazed, and his eyes were a bit unfocused. She saw a certain emotion in the depths of his eyes, which made her heart beat faster. Something seemed to melt in her heart. At this moment, she was half propping herself up. Their bodies were no longer close together, but in reality, there was only an extremely small distance. This kind of distance was actually even more ambiguous. Li Yi only needed to shift his gaze slightly to see more scenery. However, he could not think about this at this moment. The dazed look in his eyes quickly dissipated, and he realized what situation he was in right now. He looked at her pretty face, which was inches away from him. Their breaths blew on each other's faces, and they just stared at each other in a daze. Li Yi looked away. He was worried that he would not be able to recover from her almost natural seductive posture, and his hands quickly let go. Xing Zumo saw a certain emotion fade from his eyes. Her body stiffened slightly, and her face was no longer blushing. A trace of pain and disappointment appeared in the depths of her eyes, and she struggled to climb up from his body. Li Yi only glanced at her tentatively. When he saw the light in her eyes fade, his heart almost uncontrollably tightened. Without any hesitation, his hand once again wrapped around her slender waist, and he exerted a little force. In the end, the goddess of Luo Shui didn't get up. She fell on his body even more heavily than before. This time, the two of them looked at each other's eyes and noses. They both saw the same thing in each other's eyes. They just stared at each other without saying a word. Only the sound of their heartbeats could be heard clearly in the quiet room. The servant girl, who had already put her thumbs in her mouth, finally seemed to realize something. She gently closed the door without making a sound. Then, she pressed her ear against the door and held her breath. An excited expression appeared on her face. After a quarter of an hour, she still didn't hear any sound. Her feet were a little numb from standing. She held on to the door and pressed her ears even closer. The door was open from the inside. Li Yi supported Xiao Chui's forehead to prevent her from falling. He stepped out of the room, pinched her face, and said, "So young, yet not learning good things." Watching him walk out, Xiao Chui rubbed her face. When she looked into the room, she saw the young miss coming down from the bed. Her clothes were neat and tidy, but her face was a little red. Other than that, there didn't seem to be anything strange. She grew up in a brothel and naturally knew much more than ordinary women. She knew that if something had happened between them just now, the young miss would definitely not be like this. She shook her head with some regret. These two really were strange people. Xing Zumo walked out of the room. Her face was still flushed like a peach blossom. She sat at the stone table in the courtyard and stared in a certain direction. Although they didn't say anything or do anything just now, the two of them hugged each other and stared at each other for a long time. Some things were different from before. These things didn't need to be said. Sing Shichen walked in from outside and even looked back suspiciously. He had met that person here several times, and with some rumors in the outside world, he was almost certain of that possibility. He wanted to say something about this matter, but with the relationship between the two of them at this time, he couldn't. He stood by the table and opened an exquisite paper package. He looked at Sing Zumo and said with a smile, "Zumo, Fuji released a new product 2 days ago. The taste is not bad, try it." Sing Zumo looked up at him. Although she didn't speak, she poured a cup of tea from the table and moved the teacup to the opposite side. The expression on Sing Shichen's face froze. He looked at her as if he couldn't believe it. His hand holding the teacup trembled slightly. He slowly sat down, suppressed the surprise in his heart, and drank the cup of tea in one gulp. The tea was cold, but the warmth in his heart even surpassed that of the day he was promoted to Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, and countless envious gazes in the court. The slovenly old man sat in the carriage and glanced at Li Yi. He asked, "Go back?" Li Yi nodded. The slovenly old man looked at him suspiciously and asked, "Didn't you come to see the house today? Haven't you seen it yet? Didn't you take a detour because of the traffic jam?" The slovenly old man looked at him as if he didn't know whether he had seen it or not. Li Yi waved his hand and got into the carriage. "Then let's go see it." What was it that made him so happy that he even forgot the serious matter of this trip? The slovenly old man looked back in a certain direction, and his heart was full of doubts. The house had almost been arranged, and they could move in tomorrow. Li Yi had just packed some things he needed. As for the daily necessities and the like, there were maids to take care of them. Life in the future would not be so boring. In the morning or afternoon, he could accompany Rui to take a walk by the lake of the Mathematics Institute, or he could walk more and go shopping. It was not far from the Imperial Palace, and the proud Lolita and Yongning could come over every day. Rui liked children, and she also liked them to play at home. Li Yi did not know what it would be like at home after they gave birth to their children. Mississippi Lou's mood seemed to have improved again. Li Yi felt that the beating was not in vain, but he still had to remember it. A gentleman's revenge was never too late. One day, she would definitely regret it. Everything had been going well recently. It seemed that all his bad luck had been used up when he was kidnapped by the Taoist nun. He could lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun peacefully. He did not have to think about anything, and he could not help but want to smile when he thought about it. The little maid's hands were soft, and it was comfortable wherever he pressed. Recently, the sunlight in this courtyard had been particularly dazzling, so when Fong came in, he had to be careful. He did not want to see something that he should not see, and he did not have to worry too much about the problem of loyalty and justice. "Young master, the Chui family is really going to hold a glass appreciation meeting. They invited a lot of people, and it will be held in half a month. The Chui family must have invited a lot of people since they delayed the meeting so much, and it would not be limited to the capital. They were really making a big move." Others did not know how many pieces of glass the Chui family had accumulated, but Li Yi was very clear about what each piece of glass was. He knew it even better than the Chui family themselves. They dared to mess up their business. Although it was not a big impact, it was really disgusting. When it came to disgusting people, he had never been afraid of anyone. After thinking about it, he waved at Fong. "Come here, there are some things that need to be arranged." Chapter 755. Although not everyone knew that the Chui family would hold a glass appreciation party in half a month, all the influential people in the capital received an invitation. Although the venue was not as high class as the Wang families, it was said that the scale was much larger. The number of glasswares would be several times that of the Wong families. It was strange that such a precious object as glass was rarely seen. Why did it suddenly increase these days? Many people were puzzled. The royal family once held a glass appreciation party, and there were many glass Buddha statues and wares on display. This was not strange. It was not strange for the royal family to take out any treasures. A few months ago, the Wong clan also held a glaze bazaar and took out even more glaze. This was not strange. The Wong clan was rich enough to rival a country, and they coincidentally met a foreign merchant, so they obtained so many glaze wares. It was nothing special. But why did the Chui family join in the fun this time? According to their bold words, it seemed that the glass they had accumulated was more than the Wong family took out at the last glass bazaar. Everything had a limit. The reason why glass was precious was because it was rare. Only a fool would spend so much money to buy a glass appreciation party that was held every few days. Of course, the number of glass on the market was far from overflowing. Even if the price was really reduced, the Chui family still made a lot of money this time. The Chui family was proud of their success, but the merchants in the same jewelry business in the capital were having a hard time. The wind of glass in the capital had been blowing for several months, and there was no sign of it stopping. The actions of these big families were getting bigger and bigger. If this continued, it would be difficult for them to do business. Everyone was scrambling for glass, but it was expensive. With their wealth and status, it was difficult to get it. Running a small business could not be compared to the Chui family's golden jade pavilion. They could only hope that the heavens would quickly take back the gift of glass and give them a way out. The shopkeeper of a jewelry shop in the capital was sitting in the shop and sighing. From morning until now, there was not a single customer in the shop. This business was really impossible. While he was lamenting in his heart, a black shadow suddenly appeared in front of him. The shopkeeper jumped in fright. When he looked up, he saw a tall and sturdy man walking in from outside. "Sir, are you looking at jewelry? Are you giving it to someone or?" The shopkeeper hurriedly went up to greet him. This was the first customer of the day, so he had to treat him well. In a place like this, sometimes they wouldn't be able to open for business for a few months after completing a single business. "I don't look at jewelry." The man's voice rang out like a great bell. "I'm here to sell you something." Selling things. When the shopkeeper heard this, he immediately lost interest. He waved his hand and said, "We sell jewelry here, we don't buy things." The burly man took out a sparkling and translucent glass ball from his sleeve. The shopkeeper swallowed the second half of his words. His eyes widened and his breathing became hurried as he stared at him. "I have a batch of colored glaze to sell to you." The burly man looked at him and said, "Look at this color, this luster, this feeling, it's definitely a top-notch colored glass." The shopkeeper stared at the glass ball in his hand. Even his breathing stopped for a moment. If such an item was placed in his shop, it would undoubtedly become the treasure of the shop. He didn't know how many customers it would attract. He did not have the right to attend the colored glaze appraisal conference in the palace, nor did he receive an invitation to the Wong family's colored glaze bazaar. This time, no matter what price he had to pay, he would leave behind this glass ball. Seeing that the shopkeeper did not speak, the man thought that the shopkeeper did not believe him. Frowning, he suddenly raised his hand and threw the glass ball to the ground. Paw! After an extremely crisp sound, the burly man crouched down and pointed at the pile of fragments on the ground. "Look, these cracks, these fragments, they're not fake, right?" He picked up a piece and handed it to the shopkeeper. "If you don't believe me, feel it." The shopkeeper's lips trembled and his face had already turned purple. He pointed at the burly man and said in a trembling voice, You. The burly man patted his shoulder and said, don't rush. If you don't believe me, I'll let you throw one yourself. Bring it in." He waved his hand and two people outside the door carried in a large box. After opening it, the shopkeeper's gaze was completely attracted by the dazzling array of items in the box. The burly man looked at him and said with a smile, "How about it? Today we happen to be having an activity. Each item is 10 taels. 10 taels of silver, you won't lose out. 10 taels of silver, you won't be fooled. 10 taels of silver, you can buy a piece of colored glaze. How about it? Are you tempted? Action is better than action. If you buy 10 pieces at once, you won't have to pay for the broken one. 10 taels of silver for 1 piece." The shopkeeper raised his head and looked at him, his eyes flashing. "What, you think it's expensive?" The burly man looked at him and said with a smile, "If you buy more, the price can be negotiated." Shi was the steward of the Chui family's Golden Jade Pavilion in the capital and the neighboring prefectures. Originally, he was only an unimportant member of the Chui family, but soon he was no longer. If all these colored glaze were sold, the Chui family could make a huge profit from it. And this was all because of his foresight a few months ago. The last colored glaze charity sale of the Wang family did not satisfy everyone. Instead, it made the love of colored glaze popular in the capital. The colored glaze bought from the Wang family could be sold at a high price with a slight change of hands, and the Chui family hoarded the colored glaze from the foreign merchants. When the public's desire for the colored glaze reached its peak, they took the opportunity to sell it, then they waited to count the silver. After this incident, he would definitely be valued by the family and become a core member of the family. It was unlikely that he would be able to develop in the imperial court in this lifetime. But if he was only in charge of the Chui family's business, it was very possible. The invitations had been sent out. Only 10 days later, the Chui family's colored glaze appraisal would begin. That moment would be the new peak of his life. Everything was ready except for the east wind. Shi looked at a young man coming from afar and asked, "Dongfeng, what's the matter? Why are you so flustered?" Third uncle, it's over, it's over." Chui Dongfeng's face was pale and his voice was full of fear. "What's the panic, what's the panic?" Shi looked at him discontentedly and said, "What the hell happened? Is the sky falling down? Colored glaze, colored glaze." Chui Dongfeng gasped. "What happened to the colored glaze?" Shi's face changed and asked, "Could it be that something happened to the Chui family's colored glaze?" The word colored glaze was related to his future. Shi's heart immediately tightened. "The Chui family's colored glaze is fine." Hearing Chui Dongfeng's first sentence, Shi's heart was relieved. As long as the colored glaze was fine, everything was fine. But there are colored glaze everywhere in the capital now. Chui Dongfeng's voice was still trembling. "You can buy a piece of colored glaze with 10 taels of silver and get a piece of soap. If you buy clothes, you get a colored glaze hairpin. If you buy perfume, you get a colored glaze bracelet. The Drunken Moon brothel, the chopsticks in the Drunken Moon brothel have been replaced with colored glaze." Shi's body softened and he grabbed Chui Dongfeng's arm. His eyes immediately became bloodshot and he asked in a trembling voice, You say it again." Chui Dongfeng's eyes were already full of despair. These days, a large amount of colored glaze suddenly appeared in the capital. Colored glaze is no longer valuable. When the Chui family was about to hold a colored glaze appreciation party and wait to make a big profit, the originally hard-to-buy colored glaze suddenly became a common thing on the street overnight. Who would spend a lot of money to buy the Chui family's colored glaze? But the problem was that the price paid by the Chui family for these colored glaze was too great. Shi knelt on the ground, his vision turned black and there was only one thought in his mind. It's over. Not far away, there was already a noisy sound of footsteps coming. Li Yi still overestimated the patience of the Chui family. In just half a year, the price of colored glaze fell from the clouds to the ground. If it continued for a few more days, there would still be a big profit to be made. However, he also knew that this matter should end here. This kind of money could not be earned too much. If it continued, the fragile economic system of the Jing kingdom might be at risk of collapse. The old emperor would be angry with him. While thinking about these things, Wang Yong hurriedly walked in from the outside. As soon as he entered the door, he asked with a face full of joy, "Brotherly, have you heard, the Cui family?" Li Yi nodded, sighed and said, "The Cui family, this time, the Cui family, I'm afraid, will lose millions of taels of silver." Chapter 756. Of course, the Cui family was going to lose money. Their brains were damaged. Using a large amount of jewelry and silver to exchange for a bunch of worthless junk, if they didn't lose out, who would? However, everyone knew that this couldn't be blamed on the Cui family. After all, since ancient times, colored glass had been an extremely precious treasure. This was not only reflected in its value, but also its significance. Crystal clear and radiant, it was already very attractive. It was also a Buddhist treasure, symbolizing good fortune. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to see it in their lifetime. Who would have thought that such a good treasure would become cabbages on the side of the road overnight? Previously, it was worth 3,000 taels of silver, but now it could only be used as a token to buy clothes. Buy one and get two free. The difference was like heaven and earth. No matter how smart one was, they wouldn't have thought of it. No wonder the Cui family suffered a loss. The rarer something was, the more expensive it was. It was all because in such a short period of time, too much colored glass had appeared in the capital, and the price of colored glass was dropping by the day. The crystal was clear and colorful, and it was beautiful, but that kind of crystal clear and colorful thing was everywhere in the capital, so who would want it? This time, the nobles in the capital were all dumbfounded. A few months ago, they spent thousands of taels of silver to buy the colored glass wares. In the blink of an eye, it was worthless. No one would feel good about this. This time, they were screwed over by the Wang family. The monks were equally dumbfounded. Other people's colored glass wares were at most 1,000 taels of silver, but their colored Buddha statues were worth no less than 10,000 taels of silver. There were countless people who secretly complained about the royal family and the Wang family, but they didn't dare to show it on the surface. After all, among the two families, either one was extremely powerful. Even the nobles couldn't afford to offend them. However, when they heard that the head of the Wang family smashed hundreds of colored glass wares in front of everyone, the complaints in their hearts lessened and turned into mockery and schadenfreude. The Wang family actually still had so many colored glass wares. They must be thinking of making a few more windfalls in the future. Otherwise, why would they hold the colored glass appreciation convention? Now that colored glass was worthless, although they suffered a loss, compared to the Wang family's loss, it was simply a drop in the bucket. People were always like this. When they were unlucky, they couldn't help but feel better when they knew that others were even more unlucky than them. Of course, it was not all a loss for them. The colored glaze that the royal family and the Wang family sold to them were all donations. Everyone was registered, and a large portion of it went to the national treasury. At least, it left a record with the emperor, which could prove that they had done their best for the country. The silver was not all for naught. The Cui family was different. According to the calculations of some people, the Cui family's loss this time was at least 4 million taels of silver. What kind of concept was 4 million taels of silver? It was almost a third of the Jing kingdom's annual tax revenue. No matter how deep the Cui clan's resources were, this number was still a heavy blow to them. It was so heavy that it hurt their bones and shook their foundation. Without many years of recuperation, it would be impossible for them to recover. At this moment, everyone understood what was going on. The Wang family, the Cui family, the big and small dignitaries in the capital, and even the royal family, were all fooled by those foreign merchants. Ever since Lioli became a common commodity, those foreign merchants disappeared without a trace. They suddenly appeared and then disappeared, taking away a large amount of silver. They completely ignored some people in the capital, and for a long time, they could only tighten their belts and live their lives. Damn foreign merchants. So much so that this sentence became a classic that people in the capital often said. Where those foreign merchants went, even after many years, was still an unsolved mystery. I want a house to bring me here. We agreed that my house will be opposite yours. Yi Zichen said. I have to go back, bring Xiao Lian, to get married. Looking at the laughing figures in front of him, Li Yi waved his hand and said, You can ask Mr. Lu for these things, he will arrange it for you. As long as they earned enough points, they would be able to exchange for what they needed. Be it silver, houses, or even pointers from top experts, they were all clearly marked. This was the rule of the Lu Alliance. From the beginning, Li Yi did not intend to tie them down with friendship or anything else. Tangible benefits were the strongest ties to maintain a relationship. Of course, everything would not be so unreasonable. Mississippi Lu didn't know these things, but Lu Luo knew how to win people's hearts. Before they left, Li Yi reminded them worriedly, Remember, don't talk to people like this when you go out, or you will be beaten to death. Remember to tell them. Now in the capital, foreign merchants were hated by everyone. If they were discovered, it would not be as simple as a beating. I'm sorry, I'm used to it. A man touched his head awkwardly and left with the others. They didn't need to report to Li Yi about the matter of Lioli, but these people were different. They were the ones in charge of contacting the Qi Kingdom. The news of Lioli's worthless value would soon reach the Qi Kingdom, and they needed to go there to make some arrangements. Young master, isn't it too much to earn so much money? Fong scratched his head and couldn't force out a complete sentence. 2 years ago, he was still risking his life for a few copper coins. How long had it been? The amount of money he had passed through was already in the millions. When he thought about it, there was always a feeling of unease in his heart. It is a little too much. Li Yi nodded. Although this method of earning money was fast, it seemed to be similar to cheating and swindling people. If one cheated too many people, they would suffer retribution. However, the old emperor was personally involved in this matter. Without his approval, there wouldn't be a Lioli Bazaar. Even if there was retribution, the reputation of the royal family and the Wang family was much greater than that of the Li family. The soup is ready. I'll go take a look. Li Yi walked towards the kitchen and waved at him. Go ahead. When you pass by Willow Lane, help me get some osmanthus cakes. They were now in the new residence in the capital. This place was not far from the School of Mathematics and the Imperial Palace. The environment was quiet and secluded, and it was some distance away from the noisy market. There was a slope behind the house. The slope was not steep, but standing at the top of the slope, one could overlook the surrounding scenery. The most eye-catching thing was the artificial lake of the School of Mathematics and Mathematics. At dusk, it would feel good to hold Rui's hand and take a walk there. What he had to do every day was to wake up early. Before the morning market dispersed, he would cross a few streets to buy some fresh vegetables. Sometimes, he would carry a fresh fish and stop at Willow Lane to rest for a while. When the sun rose to 45 degrees Celsius, he would return home to prepare dinner. He didn't need to do any of the procedures. At most, a maidservant would help him pick the vegetables and light the fire. At this time, Yongning would bring a small stool and sit down to watch. The Tsundra Lolita wanted to help but was always a nuisance. This kind of life was good enough. Li Yi scooped a bowl of soup and tasted it. The taste wasn't too strong. He decided to let it boil for a while longer. He only drank a mouthful of soup, but he didn't want to waste it. He placed it on the stone table outside and walked to the back to call Xiao Huan to drink it. The soup was for Rui to keep her body healthy, but it was also good for ordinary women. It could beautify their skin, enhance their breasts, and stimulate their breasts. Little maidservants should drink more of it. This was the secret recipe of the old monk Tan Yin. It was said that it was for keeping her body healthy. Li found a similar recipe in a book, but it had a few more effects. Xiao Huan couldn't be found. She might have gone somewhere with the Tsundra Lolita. When Li Yi returned, he saw someone sitting at the stone table. The bowl of soup had already been emptied. This soup tastes good. It took a long time. It's good for the body. Li Yi looked at the middle-aged man sitting there and smiled. Drink more if you like it. Chapter 757. This was the second time that Li Yi saw the old emperor leave the palace. He was still the same as when he was in Ning Wangfu, wearing an ordinary robe. His face was gentle and he looked like an uncle next door. No one knew that the person in front of them was the most powerful uncle in the entire Jing kingdom. The old emperor's illness was special. It was very dangerous when it acted up, so dangerous that there was a possibility that he would die every time. But normally, if one paid attention, there was no difference between him and a normal person. He did not come alone. The eldest princess was standing next to him, wearing a slim dress. He did not know if it was because of the dress, or if her figure had become better, but her figure seemed to be more exquisite than a few days ago. Moving here was for the sake of peace and quiet. There were not many servants in the residence, but even if they met, they would not dare to stop them. So the old emperor had the opportunity to drink the soup that she prepared to trick Xiao Huan to drink. Changde came out of the kitchen with 2 bowls of soup. Li Yi glared at him. This old guy really did not treat himself as an outsider. Fortunately, he had his own thoughts and even made a portion for Xiao Huan and Rui. Otherwise, there would not be much left for Rui. Jing Emperor picked up another bowl, and Changde handed the other bowl to the eldest princess. When they came over, they saw Li Yi put down the soup and went to the back. Jing Emperor drank a few mouthfuls before asking, "Did you make this soup?" He knew that Li Yi had good cooking skills. Because Shaning often talked about it in his ears, he had the chance to taste it today. He was surprised by his cooking skills. It was probably not much different from the imperial chefs in the palace. Changde looked at Li Yi and asked, "This soup, is it suitable for your Majesty's body to drink more?" Li Yi had once told him about His Majesty's illness. There were many things that needed to be avoided on a daily basis, and diet was an important part. He was worried that Li Yi would forget, so he asked about it. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's okay. This soup is very nourishing. It's okay to drink a few more bowls." This soup was good for women, and there was no harm for men to drink it. It was just a supplement. The Princess Royal had a good figure, but it was only good. Compared to Mississippi Lu, the parts that should be curvy were curvy, but the parts that should be curvy were not curvy enough. She should drink more. Placate the miscarriage and stimulate the breast milk. The spoon that Jing Di had picked up stopped in the air, and the soup spilled on his lapel. Cough. Cough. And Mingsu put down the bowl. She seemed to have choked and her face was already red. She glared at Li Yi and hurriedly took out a handkerchief to wipe her mouth. Li Yi had never seen her act like a little girl. In fact, he had always regarded the swift and decisive princess as a man. Jing Di put down the spoon, obviously not intending to drink anymore. Mingsu also put down the bowl and secretly looked at Li Yi with a hint of anger. "Your Majesty, why are you?" Li Yi changed the topic at the right time. Jing Di looked at him and asked, "Why?" "You, the Dean of the Academy, is allowed to be lazy at home, but we cannot go out of the palace to relax." Li Yi quickly said, "Steal half a day of leisure." The palace is like a cage. Your Majesty often goes out to relax. It is also good for your illness. Mingzu glanced at him. He was the only one who dared to say that the palace was a cage in front of her imperial father. Steal half a day of leisure. Jingdi looked at him and said with a tone of dissatisfaction, "We think you are stealing half a day of leisure, right?" Jealousy. It was obvious that he was jealous. He obviously saw that he was living a comfortable life and deliberately came to find trouble. Li Yi was too lazy to pay attention to him and stood aside without saying anything. Jingdi looked left and right and asked, "Where are Yongning and Shaning?" Li Yi pointed in a certain direction and said, "At the amusement park." He ordered people to build the amusement park. Several houses were connected and the ground was covered with soft mats. There were rocking cars, merry-go-rounds, slides, swings, and other amusement facilities. It was also the favorite place of Yongning, Shaning, and Duanwu. Although there were no exciting projects such as roller coasters and skydiving machines, in this era of extreme lack of entertainment, this was already considered super luxurious. "Take us to see." Jingdi seemed to be very interested in this place and stood up. Li Yi originally chose this place because he liked the environment here. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a small park. There was running water in the garden, and the water was so clear that the bottom could be seen. Fish were playing in the water. Although the layout was not very luxurious, it was simple and did not lose its atmosphere. After passing through a bamboo forest path, their field of vision became open again. They could hear bursts of laughter coming from a row of houses. The arrogant Lolita was playing on a swing, and a palace maid was gently pushing it behind her. When she saw Li Yi coming in, she said loudly, "Sir, sir, you push me." "They are not pushing high." Li Yi walked over, stopped the swing, and carried her down from the swing. The arrogant Lolita pouted and was about to express her dissatisfaction. Suddenly, she opened her eyes wide and saw a figure coming in from outside the door. She ran over in surprise and said, "Father, why are you here?" Yongning also came over and stood quietly beside Jingdi. Jingdi touched their little heads and said, "If father didn't come, my Shaning and Yongning would have almost forgotten father." The arrogant Lolita twisted her body and said in a sweet voice, "Oh, how could Shaning forget father?" Jingdi looked at the two little girls, and a trace of sadness appeared on his face. He was their father, but he was also the emperor, the ruler of a country. Since they were young, he did not and could not fully fulfill the responsibilities of a father. It was no wonder that they always wanted to run out of the palace. The arrogant Lolita was full of joy for her father to leave the palace. She grabbed his arm and said, "Father, let's go outside to play. There are a lot of delicious food and fun things on the street. I will take father to the brothel to watch the show." "It is wonderful." Jingdi pinched her little face and said with a smile, "Okay, father will accompany you to have fun today." "Father is so good." The arrogant Lolita shook his arm and looked at Li Yi. She said, "As good as teacher." Li Yi felt that the arrogant Lolita thought that teacher was good because teacher would cook delicious food for her, play with her, and take her to watch interesting shows. Other children could get married at the age of 13. Because she grew up in the palace and was doted on by the emperor and two concubines, her temperament was similar to that of a child. The aged emperor was dragged by Shou Ning through the streets and alleys, sweeping through the crowd. Although there was only Changde following behind them, Li Yi could guarantee that if there was even the slightest movement from his side, within a breath's time, this place would be surrounded by 3 layers of people. Li Yi and the eldest princess were walking behind. He turned his head and looked at her. He asked, "How is the cooperation with the family of generals?" Li Mingzu said lightly, "It has just begun. The military provisions are very important. You have to visit the family of generals more often." "How about the academy? Is everything okay?" "Everything is as usual. Although it is a female academy, we still have to pay attention to it. If there is nothing else, we should hold more parent-teacher meetings to let the parents understand the situation. It will also put them at ease. The arrogant Lolita was always short-lived. After pestering Jing Di for a while, she pulled Yong Ning along to play. Jing Di had a few palace guards follow them, and their footsteps finally slowed down. Li Emingzu looked at the smile on his face and thought for a moment. She said, "If there is nothing important, Father might as well rest outside the palace for a few days." Li Yi was right. The palace looked glorious, but it was actually a cage. When she was in the palace, she had never seen her father show such a smile. Emperor Jing did not answer her. He looked at the group of children holding sugar-coated haws in their hands as they whizzed past the crowd. He shook his head and said, "When I was their age, I had already begun to study the scriptures. If I could let the children of poor families have books to read, the talents of the Jing kingdom would be inexhaustible in the future." Li Yi knew that the old emperor had wanted to break the situation where the court was almost controlled by the aristocratic families. From a long time ago, he had intentionally supported the students of poor families. However, due to various reasons, the results were very little. In this era, educational resources were very precious. They were often monopolized by the large clans with deep foundations. It was not easy for the poor to study. This directly led to the imperial court choosing officials from the aristocratic families. Only they had the ability to nurture outstanding disciples. However, this would cause the court to be filled with factions and complicated relationships. The court would be firmly controlled by the aristocratic families. This was not what a wise emperor wanted to see. For a wise emperor like the old emperor, what he was most concerned about was the poor people and the students of poor families. Li Yi crossed his arms and touched Mingzhu's shoulder. This was a rare opportunity. He had told her in detail how to support the children of poor families and break the monopoly of the aristocratic families in education. If he were to bring it up now, wouldn't he be saying it to the old emperor's heart? He had explained these routines clearly, and they only needed to follow the steps step by step. Mingzu glanced at him and thought that he was careless. She lowered her head and continued to think. Li Yi touched her again. Mingzu was still unmoved. Li Yi frowned and turned to look at her. This time, he used a little more force. Mingzu finally turned to look at him. When she saw that he was staring at her, she seemed to have thought of something. She blushed and glared at him. Then, she put some distance between them. This was a good opportunity to show off her talents in front of the old emperor. Li Yi wanted to talk to her about serious matters. What was with this blushing expression? What was this woman thinking about? Whether it was on the surface or in the dark, he had done enough for her. However, he couldn't always be the one to take the initiative, right? He was working himself to the bone, but she was enjoying herself up there. How could this be? She should at least take the initiative, right? Chapter 758. Hey, you have to move yourself. Bah, do you still remember the story I told you last time? Li Yi felt that he was facing a blockhead who could not understand anything. He looked at her and asked with a frown. Mingzu looked at him in confusion. What story? Li Yi reminded her. Woo, Mingzhu's heart skipped a beat. She subconsciously reached out to cover his mouth. She looked around and said, "Don't ever say such rebellious words again." Seeing that her father did not hear it, even if he heard the word woo, he would not think of anything. This was a secret between the two of them. Only then did she feel slightly relieved. That matter could not be made known to outsiders, and even more so to his father. What are you thinking about all day? Li Yi pushed her hand away and looked at her unhappily. He said, "Open the imperial examination, put the poor in important positions, fill the court with gentlemen, and replace the aristocratic families." This is to share His Majesty's burden, not for you to imitate that woman. You didn't forget what I told you, did you? Mingzu shook her head. She looked at him and nodded as if she understood. Her father had been putting the poor in important positions, replacing the aristocratic families, and letting the young scholars from poor families enter the center of the court. In the face of aristocratic politics, the poor had always been suppressed. After entering the court, they would be loyal to the royal family, which could effectively change the current situation in the court. Her father had done some things in response to this, including establishing a mathematics academy and recruiting a large number of commoners. However, she knew that there were more things that could be done to further expand the advantages of the commoners. In the end, it could turn into the kind of situation that Li Yi described, where the court was filled with noblemen and the rivers were clear. Because these things were related to the woman surnamed Wu. This was something she did not dare to think about normally. At this moment, with Li Yi's reminder, she understood that a method was a method after all. It worked in that fictional story, and it could have the same effect in reality. A woman's mind was really hard to guess. Even if Li Yi never thought of the eldest princess as a woman, he still couldn't guess her thoughts. Fortunately, she finally understood his meaning. Li Yi took the tonghulu that the proud Lolita handed over. As he ate, he watched Princess Royal walk over and talk to Jing Emperor in a low voice. After eating 2 candied haws, he felt that something was wrong. Sour and sweet was what candied haws should taste like. The 2 candied haws he ate didn't taste sweet, only sour. When he looked down, it turned out that the sugar had already been licked clean. When he turned around, he saw that Sundra lowly covering her mouth and giggling at him. This little girl was becoming more and more impudent. After listening to Mingzhu's narration, Jing Emperor's eyebrows raised slightly. Then, he shook his head and said, "Opening a large number of official schools can allow more poor students to study, but the cost is too great. It's so great that the imperial court cannot afford it." There were some methods that he had already decided on after weighing them in his heart. However, when it came to finances, he still had to hesitate. Although the national treasury had a lot of income in the past few days, it was not to the extent that it could be squandered wantonly. Wars, natural disasters. There were many places that needed money. It was not easy to maintain the balance, and it could not be easily broken. Li Yi said solemnly, "No matter how poor we are, we can't be poorer in education. No matter how bitter we are, we can't let our children suffer. They are the future of a country. They are related to the rise and fall of the country. They are like the sun in the morning, full of vigor and infinite potential. Now the Jing kingdom is ours, but the future of the Jing kingdom is still in their hands." Jing Emperor never despised the theory of governance that came from Li Yi's mouth. Moreover, these words were indeed what he was thinking. A large part of the reason why the imperial court was controlled by the aristocratic families was that they had a monopoly on education and books. It was too difficult for poor children to enter the imperial court without going through these aristocratic families. They could only rely on themselves. If all the children of poor families in the world could go to school and have books to read, this problem that had existed for thousands of years would be resolved in this dynasty. And this would be the first step for him to completely end the aristocratic politics. However, he did not have much time. It was still unknown whether he could completely eliminate some things in his lifetime. Jing Emperor shook his head and said, "I have also vigorously promoted the prefectural schools and the county schools. But you are not in the position to know how much it costs. A problem that can be solved with money is not a problem." Li Yi looked at Mingzhu and asked, "Your Highness, don't you think so?" The national treasury could not take out the extra money, but the Princess Royal could. It was useless for her to earn so much money. It was impossible for her to save all of it for her dowry. It would be better to build more Mingzhu Hope primary schools. At least, it would let the poor in the world remember her kindness. The plaque on the school should be custom-made and big, so that everyone would know that it was the Princess Royal who pitted them that they could study. What's more, she did not have to pay for this money. Li Yi had a plan in his heart. Maybe he could save more dowry for her so that they would not be friends in vain. Mingzu looked at him in a daze. She did not know what Li Yi was thinking, but she was sure that he was thinking about something. Jing Emperor did not delve into this issue because the Tsundere Lolita had already pulled him to the brothel to watch the show. Mingzu crossed her arms and looked at him. What do you want to do? Eat the Emperor's salary and share the Emperor's worries. Li Yi did not go in. He leaned against the wall of the brothel and said, Your Majesty has been supporting the poor. This is to solve the problem from the root. Mingzu thought about it and blinked her eyes. Do you have a salary? Li Yi thought carefully for a moment and found that he really did not have a salary. He did not have much money, and it was deducted because he got into trouble. The old emperor did not give him a salary at all. Then forget it. Li Yi waved his hand and was ready to go in to watch the show. He didn't even have a salary, so how could he worry about it? Whoever wanted to divide it, divide it. In the end, he did not step in and was grabbed by the eldest princess. Father's biggest headache is those big families that control the court. If we can help father share this worry, I will ask father to leave the palace to recuperate. Father should agree. Mingzu looked at him and said in a soft voice, Tell me, what should we do? Li Yi looked at her and corrected her, It's you who will share it, not me. Mingzu shook her head. It's the same. She was her, and he was himself. What did she mean by the same? It was a good conversation, but it suddenly became so ambiguous. It made the thin-skinned Li Yi blush. Li Yi looked at her, What should we do? Didn't you say it very clearly? Mingzu looked down. But the National Treasury doesn't have that much silver. Who said we need to use the National Treasury silver? In their dreams. Li Yi pursed his lips. It was a rare opportunity. Of course, the fertile water would not flow into other people's fields. I don't have that much money. Mingzu shook her head. Then, she seemed to have thought of something and looked at Li Yi. Li Yi quickly waved his hand. Don't look at me. My family's money doesn't grow on trees. It's not easy to earn money. He patted her shoulder out of habit and squinted his eyes. Don't worry. There will be silver. What should be, there will be. Seeing a certain light in his eyes, Li Mingzhu's heart suddenly relaxed, and she became incomparably calm. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.